Thank you, Mayor. It shows up as a report and information, but really it is a discussion primarily first among the council members. Each will be provided an opportunity to make statements, ask any questions, et cetera, related to this item, which is the stormwater utility discussion, one of our high priority action items. And then, as the mayor stated earlier, there will be opportunity for questions and comments from the general public. We do have a brief staff introduction for this item. I can tell you it's 3 minutes because it's a video that lasts exactly 3 minutes. So I will play that video now, and then I will turn it over to you, Mayor Tully.
Thank you.
Changes to the stormwater utility as a Village Council has identified consider changes to the stormwater utility as a top priority action item. There are many issues which could be addressed as part of this project, such as what level of stormwater management service should the village provide? What is the plan to move from the current level of service to the recommended? How should revenue be generated? With this project, the village will be discussing stormwater, the kind of water that falls from the sky when it rains. Water that is not absorbed into the ground becomes runoff and is handled by the system owned and operated by the village. This discussion will not include tap water or wastewater or groundwater. While flooding has many causes, only some are directly related to the stormwater system. Basements can flood when sump pumps stop working or become overwhelmed, when groundwater seeps into floor cracks, or when the sanitary sewer system overflows. Flooding can be caused by stormwater, when a large rain event or series of events generates runoff that exceeds the capacity of the system and results in water running into buildings or collecting in yards and in streets. The village has owned and maintained the stormwater management system for decades. The system is designed to reduce the frequency and severity of flooding by limiting the amount of stormwater runoff that enters the system and by storing and conveying runoff in structures and in areas designed specifically for these purposes. While the stormwater system can be improved to enhance its ability to store and convey runoff, all flooding cannot be prevented. No matter how big the system is, there will be a rain event that generates more runoff than the system can handle. Therefore, the idea of solving stormwater issues is not feasible. In 2013, the village created the stormwater utility to pay for all stormwater management related expenses. Revenues are generated by fees paid by property owners that are based on the amount of impervious area located on each property. The typical house pays $9.72 a month. The village has a plan that calls for fee increases of about 8.5% a year for the next 15 years to pay for the recommended level of maintenance and the identified capital projects. The stormwater system needs to be maintained to function properly. The village has identified the maintenance activities that should be performed with an estimated annual cost of $4 million. From 2008 to 2015, the village constructed more than 50 capital projects at a cost of over $30 million. The village has identified and prioritized 22 more capital projects to be constructed at an estimated cost of more than $40 million. More information about the village's stormwater management system and the utility can be found in the Stormwater Utility Report.
Thank you, Mayor. As I said, that was just a very brief overview. There is a very thorough report, as mentioned, on our website. I would encourage anybody who's interested in this topic to read it, ask questions, send us an email. We're happy to have a dialogue with every one of our residents interested in this. And with that, Mayor, I'll turn it over to you for a council open forum.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And I want to reiterate that the way we're going to proceed on this is for the council to have a conversation about it, and then we'll get to a point where it naturally makes sense to break and ask for input and comments from the audience. But I think everyone would probably benefit from at least hearing what is on the minds of the council at this point in time. And then, of course, we'd love to hear from everyone. We're not going to make any decisions tonight on this issue. We're having an open conversation about it and want to invite you to participate in that open conversation. This is clearly an issue that has been the subject of a great deal of attention and conversation in the village of Downers Grove. I remember when I first got on this council in 2001, it was a topic then. It has continued to be a major issue, and I've often remarked that if we were to add up what the issues are that are brought to the podium at these meetings or by email or by telephone, I would say that by far the majority of the issues that are raised have to do in some way, shape, or form with stormwater. It is clearly a major issue in our community. It's clearly an issue of major concern in our community. We get more requests to do something about stormwater than just about anything else. And so it has been a high priority for this village council and prior village councils for well over, or almost 2 decades now. Just by way of history real quickly, one of the challenges that we had back in 2001, 2002 was first identifying, well, what is it that we're trying to solve? The village manager mentioned a project list and a service level and prioritization of the same. There are almost endless projects that could be done on stormwater, and we went through what was known back then as the Watershed Improvement Plan, and now it has a different name, which I keep forgetting.
Stormwater project analysis.
Stormwater project analysis,
Yes.
Much better. But at any rate, it's an identification of all the existing facilities in the town that need to be maintained, as well as what additional projects could be done to facilitate improvement of stormwater management within our community. Add to that, there are certain things that we have to do by rule, law, or regulation, as opposed to what we'd like to do. There are Clean Water Act requirements that basically the state and the federal EPA require us to do. There are certain things we have to do. Some of that is taken on by the county, but not all of it. There are certain things that we have to do. But then a lot of it is, well, what level of service do we want to deliver? All of these projects cost money, and there's no stormwater project, whether it's maintenance or capital, that's cheap. So what we did was we came up with a list of projects. They were prioritized a while ago, and then the next question is, okay, which ones do you do and how do you pay for them? So the conversation then went into how to pay for them a while ago. We've used different mechanisms such as dollars we have on hand. Bonding has been a big way to obtain funds necessary to undertake these projects. As you've seen, they are rather expensive, and therefore bonding, using the village's bonding authority to borrow the funds through bonds at our AAA bond rating, which is now what it is, in order to pay for these projects has been the way we do it. But then how do you pay for the repayment of interest and principal on those bonds? You have to have revenue source. Revenue source can come from a variety of different areas. It can come from whatever you want to apply to it. Traditionally, that had been property taxes that had been paying for stormwater, and people probably didn't even know it because they didn't see anything that said stormwater on their property tax bill. Then in 2013, we moved to a different approach, which was to break out stormwater into a separate revenue fund source that would pay for the maintenance and capital and bond payments for our stormwater projects, and that's a stormwater utility. Now everyone sees a line on their water bill that's dedicated to stormwater that helps pay for this. The conversation we're having tonight is something that's been identified in long-range planning as a high priority action item, which is to talk about possible changes to this whole system. What do we do, how do we do it, and how do we pay for it? It's important to understand, though, that in order to achieve any further progress on stormwater, there has to be some source to pay for it. I think the number was just mentioned was $4 million annual maintenance costs. $4 million has to come from somewhere, whether it's from the stormwater utility, or from property taxes, or from something else. That's part of the conversation tonight. Potentially changes to that current system, or doing something different. So we can have conversations about level of service, we can have conversation about prioritization of projects, we can have conversations about operation and maintenance versus capital investment, and we can have conversation about how to pay for those things and over what period of time. I really want to hear from my colleagues as to where their minds are. This is something that has been the subject of discussion by multiple councils over a variety of years. Different people have brought different perspectives, different views, different thoughts about it. I'm going to not go into my spiel because I think my views on this topic have been known for 15, 16 years, and that we have a current plan in place that I think is working fine. The only objection I have is that we are not actually spending the dollars on the projects that we have identified should be accomplished. There was a plan to use the stormwater utility and have phased increases over time in order to get to a dollar amount that was necessary to actually pay for the projects. Much like if you have a mortgage, you know what you have to pay off. You can do it over 15 years, you can do it over 30 years, but at some point in time, you've got to schedule out those payments to get to the dollar amount that you need to do the projects. My big criticism has been that we, I don't blame this council because it was true of prior councils, have not been willing to actually garner the dollars necessary to put towards the maintenance and capital projects that have been identified as things that we need to do. So we either need to change the level of service to something less, or we should fund the projects that we've identified need to be done. Otherwise, we're not going to get the projects done that we hear people coming to the podium over and over and over again asking to be done. So anyway, I will stop because my views are widely known and long known. I'd like to hear what everyone else has to say and think, and then of course, would love to hear from the audience in terms of what their thoughts are on a topic that again has been fairly high importance for the last almost 20 years now. So who would like to start? Commissioner White has his pen up, please.
My views on this topic are essentially the same as they were in the spring of 2013 when I presented a rather elaborate analysis of my opinion on the stormwater utility. So I'm going to go through how I think we should break down and tackle the problem. First, let me start by saying that the operations and the maintenance component, which was shown on that, I think we have no choice but to fully fund that. I think it's in the best interest of the community that we fully fund that. My research into the history and the origins of the stormwater utility was that it was created as a mechanism to help overcome the lack of political will to properly fund these things. Mayor Tully spoke a few minutes ago about the fact that there's this ramp, and both the prior council and to some extent this council has been reluctant to follow that ramp and fully fund everything on that list. That's the exact same reluctance, which it's the same category, type of reluctance, which led to the initial creation of the storm utility concept many decades ago. So the fact that we're running into an obstacle now with that, rather than this quote trying harder end quote, we need to take a step back and look at the entire process. To jump ahead a little bit, my current recommendation, my current position, subject to discussion with the entire council, is that the stormwater utility be restricted to the $4 million in operations and maintenance. We have to ramp up to that. I don't believe that we can just jump to $4 million in operations and maintenance in 1 year, but in a relatively short period of time, fully fund all operations and maintenance exclusively with the stormwater utility. And on the flip side, expend the stormwater utility exclusively on operations and maintenance. And that way we narrow the category and we hopefully will avoid future conflict between prioritizing between capital projects and operations and maintenance. I personally believe that's more in the original spirit with which the stormwater utility was invented. I used to know what state it was, whether Washington State or somewhere, where the stormwater utility was first attempted. Moving forward, given the state of the law in Illinois, I am very skeptical that it's prudent to fund capital projects with stormwater, with SW fees. My reading of the case law, there's one case that says that yes, you can have a stormwater utility. What size is allowable, what shape is allowable, what parameters are allowable is entirely undiscussed. Under Illinois law, there is no guidance as to what a stormwater, as to how far you can push the envelope. I don't want us pushing the envelope because I don't want us paying legal fees defending our pushing the envelope. I'd like a stormwater utility that fits nicely in the middle of the pack of others, and that when the Downsville stormwater utility fee was first enacted, it was the largest in the state. And then when that cut blew by us, where they just left us in the dust with the size of their stormwater utility fee. And they're now, that now is before the appellate court. I don't want us to be in that place. So the two reasons to be that I have skepticism of funding capital projects with the stormwater fee is I want to avoid the conflict between funding capital projects with funding necessary operations and maintenance if they have distinct funding sources, and we're committed to 100% of operations and maintenance through an annual stormwater utility fee. There's no conflict. And second, I have very real legal issues. And then I don't want to get into too much detail. There's lots of detail here. Downers Grove, in my research, is very unique in the number of watersheds that it has. It's absolutely, I think Downers Grove might make a marvelous municipality to write a textbook about a stormwater utility, because we have 5 distinct watersheds. Those folks who live in Nottingham, their water flows to the Des Plaines River. Everyone else flows to the east branch of the DuPage River. It's incredibly intricate, very interesting if you dig into it, but it's technical. And because of that, I don't really want us to be on the cutting edge, so to speak, from a legal point of view. That's not a prudent place for us to be. I'm also skeptical of the concept of recommended level of service with respect to capital projects. It's a nice thing, it'd be nice to be scientific and say, here's the recommended level of service, but even last week, we heard a report from the mayor that there's new ways of looking at urban flooding. And I have real skepticism as to whether we can scientifically define sufficiently, with sufficient objectivity, a recommended level of service when applied to capital projects. There's a number of capital projects that have been proposed that I fully support, I strongly support. I think we need to do those projects. I think we're getting ourselves in a big pickle by trying to pay those capital projects with the stormwater fee. If we bifurcate operations and maintenance from capital projects, fully fund operations and maintenance with a stormwater utility fee, and then go the route that this village has done for decades, if not, well, probably not yet a century, that we identify a list of capital projects we think will help alleviate neighborhood flooding. We debate that. We pass a bond issue to pay for it, and we do those projects. The total recommended level of service, there's various estimates that over the next 100, 150 years might go to $450 million. That was one of the numbers in the WIP, which is way beyond what we can possibly do. I saw a number this evening, $40 million in capital projects, but there's about 22 that's recommended within the purview of this council. So I would say this council approves the capital projects that we approve of, pass the bond issues to pay for it, and then retire those bonds with property taxes. And that's something where we can have a direct conversation with the community, whether the community believes that they're getting fair value for their tax dollars. I will say as a matter of philosophy that if this council returns to the community benefit equal or greater to the cost of the tax dollars, it's a fair trade. That taxation is not inherently evil. Taxation is a benefit to the entire community if we can return value equal to, and keeping places such as Deer Creek from flooding, I think, in my opinion, has high value. Others may have different opinions. That's why we have elections and you talk to the commissioners. But returning value is, I think, the number one priority when evaluating the taxation. I guess one final point is the report talks about the savings to the homeowners by doing this under the stormwater utility fee rather than property taxes. But looking at it, that savings comes from charging utility fees to areas of town that don't really need capital improvements. And in the context of Mr. Cass's presentation earlier about growing our sales tax base, nothing north of I-88 needs any stormwater work from a capital point of view. Two areas which I think hopefully will be studied in the comprehensive plan, the Meadowbrook Center at 63rd and Belmont and the Four Corners study of De La Motte. Half of that's in Downers Grove, the south side is in Darien and Woodridge. Those areas neither need stormwater capital improvements, nor does stormwater coming from those properties flow to cause problems downstream. Those areas basically don't need the improvements. But it's the stormwater utility fees being paid by those businesses that holds down the property taxes. That's why when you look at the chart, it's cheaper for a homeowner to have stormwater utility fees. And in my opinion, that runs contrary to our goal of trying to try to grow those districts as a place of generating future sales tax. There's a whole lot there. There's a whole lot more, but that's I've thought about this a long time, obviously, and that's where I'm at right now. And I guess I'll make one final comment. I don't want anybody to think that what I've just said is set in stone. If any of my fellow council members or if any member of the public can bring arguments, facts, data, a way of looking at this that points out errors and how I'm seeing it, I'll gladly change my mind. And that the idea is for us to build a consensus so that, and that actually makes another point I want to make, that going forward, the stormwater utility system that we establish not only has 4 votes on this council, hopefully 7, but also the community at large believes that the process was transparent and that the entire community had a property to have input, and that would give whatever our final result is lasting political legitimacy. Just passing 4 votes makes it legal, but we need more than it to be legal for a stormwater system to establish, to be maintained for decades to come, and to then have us have the confidence to year after year fund what it is we agreed upon. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I just want to make sure as we go that we're clear on what everyone's suggesting, and understanding that at this point all we're doing is suggesting. I'll start with myself. What I was proposing is that we stick with the current plan, but that we actually fund it to the level that has been proposed, which we haven't been doing for years. Commissioner White, just to make sure I got this straight, you're basically proposing that the stormwater utility be retained for purposes of operations and maintenance only of existing facilities, or those to be built.
And I think, yeah, and we can look at, I think it's Fund 443, you know, I think in my memo, I ticked off the line items that at the moment I'm comfortable falling. For example, there's a neighborhood green, which is a very relatively small amount. The replacement of the 100-year plan.
Fair enough.
There's a lot of detail in that, but basically, yes.
Generally speaking.
What accountants would call current expenses.
Right, and that would include additional facilities that may be constructed, because that would obviously, there would be O&M related to those facilities.
Oh, and after they're constructed, then they get. Correct. They get put into the O&M. Yes,
and the other, and with respect to any capital projects, they would be treated like any other road project or whatnot, if we would either pay for them out of existing revenues, or we would bond out for them, and that would be paid for, the debt service would be paid from a source other than the stormwater utility. And you're proposing that would be property taxes.
Well, I actually, based on that comment, I do wish to amend slightly. Amend on another revenue source, ideally skyrocketing sales tax.
We all hope there's skyrocketing sales tax. Then we can pay for everything. But thank you. I just want to make sure that we have clarification. I don't want to favor this side, but Commissioner Olson, then we'll go back over here.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to Commissioner White for sharing that detail. I appreciate the thorough thoughts that shared on that. I think I wanted to start my comments by saying, I appreciate one point that the mayor said is that you can't pay, you can't get something for nothing. That adage, because from my perspective, addressing the stormwater system is important, and it's something that should be important to, I think, to the taxpayers of the village, and something that should be important to the village council as the taxpayers and residents' elected representatives. So, it's something we need to address, and so I view it as we do need to have some commitment to funding the stormwater system and maintaining it. I think this council has done an excellent job of continuing to ensure that our streets are maintained, to continuing to ensure that our water system is maintained, our drinking water. That's very important, and stormwater is also an important system that's under the purview of the village council. When I first was seeking to represent the people of Downers Grove in 2013, and when I was subsequently elected, at that time, I didn't take a strong position on the stormwater utility. It was very new at that time, and so it was still trying to better assess and get an understanding of it. One thing I did know was that this idea of this 8.5% hikes every year was something that was extremely concerning, and something that I've heard a lot of concern about. As I've assessed it and assessed the utility, from my perspective, I am generally opposed to the idea of stormwater utility. I would not have voted in 2012 to implement the stormwater utility. It's something, from my perspective, that has become excessively controversial, rather than, as Commissioner White pointed out, one of the goals of it was to focus and ensure there was constant revenue to maintain the system. I think in some ways, having the utility has in some ways refocused this as a point of significant controversy within the community, and has limited our ability in some ways to perform some of the maintenance and capital projects. So from my perspective, it's something I'm not particularly fond of. However, we also have to grant that we are in the reality. We're sitting here, it's March of 2016, we've had this utility in place since 2013, and we have to assess that reality as it is. I recognize there's a need to maintain the infrastructure, and as Commissioner White pointed out, the need to maintain infrastructure is something that's very important to me, and avoid some sort of issue where we don't maintain our infrastructure, it falls apart, and then later years down the road, whether that's 10 or 30 or more years down the road, the system is falling apart, and then thus in need of significant replacement. I don't like the idea of being like some governments that we see, or even private entities that we see, that let things fall apart because it's easy right now. We'll let it all fall apart because it'll be a slow process, and then somebody else will clean up the mess later. I think that's what we're experiencing in the state, and it's something I want to avoid here. So the other, from a philosophical perspective, I also believe it's irresponsible, and in my perspective, I just don't feel comfortable to say we're charging a fee, which in my mind, if you're charging a fee, if I'm charged a fee, I expect to be getting a service or a good in return for that fee. And so I think in that vein, it's irresponsible to make certain parts of town pay for other parts of town with that fee. And so this idea, I think, is something that I have a great concern about, is certain areas of town, Commissioner White mentioned some of the commercial areas, mentioned the Nottingham subdivision, paying for capital improvements in parts of town. And traditionally, the parts of town that need the most capital improvements are towards the center of town, the older parts of town that were constructed before there were regulations and considerations made to create detention basins and stormwater systems when subdivisions were built. So that's all that to say, so I think I've said that I don't like the stormwater utility. We need to maintain the infrastructure. I've explained a reason philosophically why I don't like the stormwater utility. So some of that could not comport. I also am not generally in favor of large tax increases. I don't like raising taxes. So all that doesn't comport directly unless suddenly the sales tax were to jump by $2 million. Well, unfortunately, that's just not the reality. I think we are taking steps in this council to put ourselves in the foundation to see growth, but that's going to be over time. And so we really need to address what are we going to do here today, looking to the next budget year. So with regard to what Commissioner White's proposed, I see some merit to what he's proposed. And essentially, what I'm hearing him saying is that we should fund the operations and maintenance of the stormwater system out of this existing utility fee, and then debt service on that would fund capital projects would be done through the normal property taxes. And to me, that makes some sense. Operations and maintenance, whether you live in the Nottingham subdivision or you own the property at 75th and Lamont Road, or you live in the center of town, the stormwater system is something that impacts you, and it does need to be maintained. So philosophically, I can see some justification for having a fee-based system at that time. The other point I wanted to make is capital projects. It's my opinion that capital projects should be referendum-based. They should be property tax-based, and they should be referendum-based. That if there is desire in the community for a large segment or a grouping of projects to be put forward, I think that should go to the community to seek their approval. We're talking about $40 million of some potential stormwater improvements. That's something I want to I think the community, such a large decision and such an impactful decision, and I think the community deserves a voice in the decision to expend $40 million on, on some significant capital projects. That said, I think the importance here is we have funding in place to maintain the infrastructure, just the operations and maintenance of the current system. And the capital projects, I think, is a different story, and that should be on the property taxes. I think capital projects affect, you can talk about taxes, and Commissioner White talked about taxes, and the reason you have taxes is part of the purpose is that tax benefits the greater good of the community. Now, if this money, if we're spending $1 million on a project, right here on Curtis Street, the idea is that the tax money that's being expended to construct that project, therefore, benefits the greater good of the community to a value larger than the $1 million you're paying for it. And I think that's a decision that I think this council should think about, but ultimately I think that's a very, very important decision. When we're thinking about large $40 million, whether $20 million have been thrown around, these type of large investments, that's something I think that's a decision the community needs to weigh in on. I think what I want to reiterate here to close is the idea of stormwater fees is not something I'm particularly enamored with. I would prefer that we be able to ramp down this fee, my general sense, I would ideally, in an ideal world, I'd like to eliminate it. The challenge is that I also want to be responsible, a responsible steward for the community in both making sure that we're able to maintain the current stormwater system and as well as without creating a significant property tax impact in the immediate term. So I think from my perspective, my long-term goal, if I were king for the next 20 years, my long-term goal would be to move to a stormwater utility system, a stormwater utility fee that would fund just operations and maintenance in the near term, and then in the long term, as this sales tax revenue booms as we hope, that we'd be able to phase out that fee altogether and eliminate it. Because recognizing the fact that suddenly posing a large property tax increase is not something that I would support at this time. The other point I want to make is that there's been ideas and discussions of more stormwater fees at the county or other levels of government, and that's also something that I strongly oppose. I think we need, from my perspective, I think we should take steps to phase out the stormwater utility, and that's what I would be in favor of. And I think this interim step is sort of, I'm not sure if Commissioner White shares that sort of philosophy, but I view what he's kind of suggesting as sort of an interim step in that move to kind of a phase out of this approach. I think that's where I'll leave it for now. I just want to throw out one other point on referendum, that it's my view that if we're going, that there may be some view that, well, we should either decide to do the entire thing, as it is now and beyond the plan is sort of what the mayor suggested, or we should eliminate it altogether one time. And I think, that type of binary choice is something I have a lot of concern with. And so that's why I like that what Commissioner White has sort of suggested in this kind of a middle ground approach and moving in the direction away from the fee. However, if we're looking at that binary approach, and if it's the will of my colleagues, I think the idea that I would suggest in that sense is that, that's something that I think perhaps the community may want to weigh in on. And that possibly could be a referendum question. I could see that in a referendum question. It's the effect of, do you prefer the elimination of the stormwater? But the problem is, you could see two questions. You want to eliminate the stormwater utility and probably get a yes vote. And you could say another question, do you want to raise your property taxes 20% so you can pay for stormwater projects? You probably get No, you don't want to do that. So, well, you don't want to do anything. And I think that a question, any sort of question, if it were posed in this sense, would have to be something that reflects the need to fund the maintenance of this system. And do you support the elimination of the fee, considering, that it would result in a 20% increase to your property tax? And I'm just pulling that out of thin air. And Commissioner White's suggesting it wouldn't be that much. That's the type of question I think needs to be posed, is that we can't, what I don't want to have happen is we can't make these decisions in a vacuum. We can't make these decisions that, well, I don't like the stormwater utility. And I don't like the stormwater utility. Philosophically, I oppose it. But I also recognize the need to fund this system. Preventing flooding in our neighborhoods is something that I think the village, rightly or wrongly, is in the business of. We need to make sure we're able to continue to do that. And so I think we need to be responsible, and whatever path we take, we need to be responsible to ensure that we're not limiting our ability to provide that essential service. I've talked way too long, Mayor. Apologies. Thank you.
I'm next.
No worries. Actually, Commissioner Jose is next, but before I go there, I just want to clarify something so we're all talking about the same numbers. The report says that the village has approximately $42 million in capital projects identified, and then identifies 2 bond issuances of $10 million each in 2018 and 2021. My question is that $42 million is not being suggested to be spent in a year. That's over what period of time?
The next 15, between 2018 and 2024.
So that's $42 million over a substantial length of time.
Wait, is it 42?
$42 million in capital projects. What says page 38.
I thought that extended out farther than the next.
And from 2008 to 2015, the village constructed more than 50 capital projects funded by approximately $25 million bond issuance. That was 50 projects over 7 years-ish.
Right, and the payments for those bonds stretch out 20 or 30 years, depending on how we would structure any bond issue.
Right, I just don't want anyone to report that there's some $42 million project that's going to be done in any particular year. This is over a substantial length of time. And every year we have a budget, and every year we have a capital plan that would have to be voted on by the council.
I have a very brief follow-up factual question on that.
Sure.
Upon spending that $42 million, would we be at the recommended level of service with respect to capital improvements?
Just check.
I mean, are we done then with capital projects after that $42 million?
Well,
See,
it's not a sidewalk majors.
We'd be a lot closer. I don't think we could say at this time we'd be done. Because if you look on the graph on page 38, we assume there will be additional capital projects to be determined coming out of 2024 for the next years going forward.
Well, not only that, but we had the 2013 rain event that actually added projects to the list because we learned things with that extraordinary rain event.
Yes.
And there was an increase in demand for service from the community after that event. So I don't know if we could say we're done. It's the kind of thing you look at every year, but the idea is to have a plan. Anyway, Commissioner Jose and Commissioner Patimo.
Mayor, I'll defer to Commissioner Patimo. And
what a gentleman.
Follow.
Commissioner
Wow.
Patimo, you have the floor.
It's always hard to follow these guys up here because
I find it very hard
I
to
just
follow
don't,
sometimes.
I don't talk as much as them. I'm sorry, I get a little impatient. Okay. Stormwater is an important infrastructure issue for our village. Our residents have mixed feelings about it. For the few with stormwater issues in their homes, it is their most important priority. For the majority, it is either a non-issue or has become a concern where they are increasingly unhappy about the rising fees on their utility bills from the village. Unfortunately, our stormwater infrastructure has been neglected over the years. The amount of money we could put into repairs and needed improvements far exceeds what we have available. It is also a difficult and expensive engineering undertaking even to analyze and understand the needs of the system going forward. Therefore, I believe the best course of action is for Village Council to agree upon a fixed percentage of our budget going forward to be dedicated to stormwater infrastructure, an amount that meets the needs of the minority with significant problems but is considerate of the majority and their tax and fee costs. I believe there's also some role for the Village Council to help in determining priorities for the limited stormwater funds. For instance, should we be providing funding for properties that are in a federal flood zone? After that, this becomes an issue where our village staff needs to make the most of the funds it receives, as, like I said, there will never be enough. As you've heard from me in the past, I don't support the existing stormwater fee. I believe that creation of the fee was really an attempt to raise more village funds without calling it a tax, especially after the property tax exempt properties who generate large amounts of stormwater were exempted from the fee. I would support an initiative to get rid of it altogether, but do not believe there is support for that from the full council. That said, I understand that once a fee is established, it is difficult to unwind from it. After much study with other council members, I believe that the existing stormwater fee needs to be dedicated only to stormwater maintenance. Otherwise, the village has a legal risk of using fees funds unconstitutionally. Any significant stormwater improvements need to be worked into the long-term capital budget supported by the property tax base. Thank you.
You get the prize for being most succinct.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jose.
Thank you, Mayor.
And we will be clapping when you are just as succinct out in the audience. How many people in the audience would like to comment on this topic?
I can't wait.
No, fewer than I thought. All right, so I'll keep that in
Well,
mind.
we only have 5 minutes, according to Mr. Olson.
No, we'll give you more.
Mr. Olson isn't running the meeting, sir. I am.
Last meeting.
I run a tight ship.
Thank you, Mayor.
I like to hear from the people. I don't know about you. I do too. Commissioner Jose.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is where we part company with some of my colleagues. Stormwater, as I've said before, is the universal issue. You either have a problem with stormwater or you know somebody that has a problem with stormwater. I think the comments of some of my colleagues are emblematic of, I think, the larger problem in play here, which is the fact that folks are talking about a stormwater system here in Downers Grove. The idea that Downers Grove has a stormwater system is a myth. What we have is a patchwork of various systems because the village developed in such different ways in such different time periods. A lot of it developed in a time when there were no stormwater regulations. Some of it's developing now when there are dramatically more stormwater regulations. The fact that there are portions of it up on Butterfield that, yes, their stormwater utility fee dollars are being used for capital projects elsewhere. The flip side of that is that there are lots of residents and business owners who experience flooding in far too many rain events that don't have a system that their quote-unquote maintenance dollars are being dedicated toward. It's being used elsewhere to maintain elsewhere. And that's why we've been using our limited resources in a divided way, part maintenance and part capital, so that we can maintain the system to a reasonable degree while also building the system in the way that it should be built in the remaining parts of town in order to alleviate the flooding that too often occurs. I don't see how we can take our limited resources and put them all into maintenance at the sacrifice of capital projects. I can't support that. And unless we're talking about a significant revenue increase, that's exactly what fully funding maintenance means. The bottom line is we have a large number of projects that need to be built. We have a plan over 15 years to, as the mayor has said, amortize our way up to that in terms of the funding. If we're going to truly be one community about this and build the stormwater system that our community deserves, then we need to stick to the plan. And that's, along with the mayor, that's what I support. Thanks.
Hold on. Please, please, please. Decorum dictates no applause. Thank you very much. Although you now have the prize for being more succinct. I'll go back to Commissioner Barnett.
No way I can be that succinct.
Thank you for your comments, Commissioner.
I didn't catch it. It was kind of quiet. We're done over there?
Sure, if you'd
kidding.
like to.
Oh,
I got a couple of questions, I guess. We talk about here that we have, I think it was 90% or so is where we're at, right? Service level target as opposed to that 100% that we're shooting for. do we have any sense, and you don't have to answer this tonight, but I'd be curious to know what we think we gain, so to speak, with the 50 projects and the 25 or 30 million? In other words, if we're 90% now, were we 70 before, were we 89 before? I'd be curious to know that. We're taking in about 3.7 million in revenue right now, and we think annual maintenance is 4, right? So that's where my,
3.7 from the utility?
from the utility, yeah, we think annual maintenance is 4, so that's where I'm hearing you guys correct, that you're thinking that you'd like, some of you would like to dedicate that stream to that maintenance issue, is that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I don't think the village staff is capable of absorbing all 4 million the first year.
Okay.
But the goal is eventual, in the relatively near future, how many years has to be worked out as a detail, but in the relatively near future, everything that would be defined as operations and maintenance, and there's some nuances to that too, would be paid by the stormwater utility.
I apologize, I didn't have a sermon, I was kind of thinking this was discussionary, so.
Yeah.
There were a couple of things, David, you talked about wanting to phase out the program, the utility portion of the program, and I don't know if it was tongue-in-cheek or if it was serious when you talked about phasing it out with the sales tax growth. Are you suggesting that your preference right now would be to phase out the utility, but then in doing so, what would you back that, what would you fill those needs with? If we're spending approximately $3 million, or not quite, $2.5 million on actual maintenance or something like that, something short of the 3.6 we're spending on maintenance, because some of it's capital service, how would you phase out the service, or would you phase in a different revenue stream, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the idea that I was suggesting was the revenue stream. I mean, I suggested the sales tax as would be ideal, but the idea is that it be phased through, rather than through increasing, we're going to make some large property tax increase, that we'd be able to grow other revenues in ways that were less impactful to the residents. So that's the idea that I was suggesting.
There's a very interesting statistical quirk. If we use 2007 as a baseline, if Downers Grove sales tax revenue had grown at the same rate that Chicagoland sales tax revenue grew as a whole, the amount of additional sales tax we'd have this year is about equal to the stormwater utility. Those two numbers are very close. So had our sales tax grown, and again, I use 2007 as the baseline, 2007 going forward, had our sales tax gone up at a comparable percentage as all of Chicagoland, we'd have another $3.5 million approximately in revenue, which then could be, we wouldn't need the stormwater utility.
Well,
and the point,
be careful though, because the problem with the sales tax is that sales taxes go like this. And one of the things, if we have something that we're deciding is very important to the community, it shouldn't be dependent upon something that waxes and wanes like the stock market. Remember what happened after 2007. And if all your capital projects and your maintenance and operations are based on whether you've got sales tax revenue, I'm sorry, folks, we're not going to clean out your culvert because the stock market didn't do well this year. Or we're not going to build this road. That's why we try to have dedicated, reliable sources of revenue for important capital projects, because we don't want them to fluctuate. Unless,
Well, it's kind of, I mean, I think it's an important aspect of the dialogue here. I mean, as Commissioner Jose said, pointed out, rather, we're currently splitting some of that between capital investment and maintenance because we have areas that are totally unserved at all. And so, one of the things that I think it seems like we have to have a question about, or we have to ask ourselves, is what do we really mean by a commitment to providing what service? I mean, are we committed to maintaining what we have and not building any more unless there's a referendum? That's one possible answer to the question. Are we committed to continuing to split whatever revenues we have, whether they're property tax, stormwater fee, or sales tax, between maintenance and investment in infrastructure? I don't think that the work we do on stormwater is something that we should subject to potential revenue streams. I mean, I happen to believe that it shouldn't be a stormwater utility. I've been clear about that for a while. That's not to say that I think we should fix what we have, maintain what we have, if we have enough sales tax, and do nothing else. That's an entirely different sort of a stretch. And I'm concerned a little bit that what I've heard is heading down those roads a little bit, because it either suggests phase it out without saying what you replace it with if there isn't sales tax growth, or dedicate the only known revenue stream to pure maintenance, which leaves members of our community, it's one of the reasons that I brought the issue forward tonight, it leaves members of our community with no infrastructure, so to speak. I think there's gaps in the conversation that I'm hoping we'll fill, not just necessarily tonight, but over the next several meetings while we talk about this. I think it's important also to recognize, as we evaluate the 5 watersheds, that, it is a complex issue. It's a complex watershed, it's a complex subject, it's one that frankly is not very well understood, because people think fixing stormwater means there's not going to be flooding. And so one of the real challenges we have as we try and figure this out and sort through this is, do we charge a utility for something that people hate the idea of utility, and oh yeah, by the way, it still floods? Or do we talk about a property tax increase down the road to pay for some investment in infrastructure, and when we're done, it still floods? It's a tough subject to be thinking we're going to settle, I think, quite so succinctly. It took us, Mayor, 7, 8 years to get to the point of first introduction to having a utility, and now we're still wrestling with it a little bit. It's just not, doesn't lend itself well to stump speeches. There's another issue, too, which is that this idea, and Bill rightly points it out, there's this question about, I'm going to use the word equity, maybe that's not the right one, but across the village, because you got these various watersheds. And it's important to remember, I think, that that's not unlike many other village services we provide, particularly in that it's not, we didn't get here because of neglect. That's just not the case. We got here because laws changed and development practices changed over the better part of the 150 years that this village has been in existence. We didn't get here because somebody neglected something. And so as we try and figure that out, it is true, no matter what we do, that there is going to be a bunch of infrastructure investment necessary in that 39th to 59th kind of zone. But it's not because of neglect, and it's not because somebody doesn't care about the fact the Nottingham watershed goes a different direction. It's because that's where the burden of the need is, based on development over a period of time and current law.
I want to clarify one point on that.
Sure.
Very briefly.
Just jump in. I want this to be a dialogue.
Good, actually, that's very good. Part of my issue with the equity of the different watersheds ends up being legal. That we can't. There's an interesting Supreme Court case out of the state of Missouri, and it was about the legality of a stormwater fee. And the Supreme Court of Missouri wrote these words. They said you can't take a horse, paint stripes on it, and call it a zebra. It's still a horse. So if we...
I'm having a hard time following anything south of the Mason-Dixon line, I'm sorry.
Well, you may be skeptical about that, but we have not discussed the legality of fee versus tax. We can't make anything a fee and have it be a legal fee. If the benefits received by the properties north of I-88, then it's not a fee. We may say, oh, it's a fee, but by putting that label on it doesn't change the fact. Now, if it's a tax, it's perfectly legal and perfectly appropriate. And yes, the areas that have the most need for new stormwater projects they're the ones that's where we should do the projects, where we create the most benefit. But the lack of equity goes to the underlying legality of our fee. And I'm extremely concerned that the stormwater utility fee is not a secure revenue stream to support bond issuance.
Well, while I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I'm extremely, and I think it's very risky to issue bonds on a revenue stream that's on very shaky legal grounds in the context of capital improvements. I'm more comfortable, and I'm very comfortable on the operations and maintenance side of it. And the only way, since there are no cases in Illinois, we're rolling the dice.
If I could interject.
Yeah, I will. I'll just throw in, I think it's probably not a stretch to say you're in the minority statewide on that point. I don't think that's, there's a number of places in Illinois that have stormwater utilities, and that doesn't seem to be a concern for them. That hasn't been the law that's been changed, and we have just as much risk, maybe as more, of the state of Illinois passing a law tomorrow that would remove our funding from property taxes. So there's a lot of ifs, whats, and shakiness that could be argued, but.
Issue the bonds before they put that freeze on. so that they can't take, it's very unlikely the state of Illinois will force us to roll back a property entity.
I would take issue with it being called rolling the dice. I understand the theory behind it, but it has yet to prevail.
Let's be clear about what was just said. Let's hurry up and raise taxes so that they can't stop us from raising taxes.
That's not what I said. What I said was that if the ability to, real estate taxes are the most stable way to pay for bonds, period.
True.
Right. True.
Commissioner
Actually, I'd like to interject on the legality point. I mean, the idea that you have a problem with the legality, but you're willing to go halfway seems a little odd to me, number one. Number two, there's currently one pending lawsuit with regard to a stormwater utility and whether or not it's legal, and pending, I mean, it's before the appellate court, but the case was dismissed, and as a practicing attorney, I know that you know that a case is not dismissed lightly. Now, it doesn't mean they don't get overturned, on occasion at least, but the idea that there are some, large, building legal challenges to the idea of a stormwater utility in Illinois is incorrect.
Commissioner Barnett.
Thanks, Mayor. A couple other questions, really. Gina, you mentioned the idea of having a fixed percentage of the budget going forward. Did you have any sense or suggestion as to what you thought might make sense, what that number is, either in dollars or percent?
I mean, maybe 10%, but, I think that's hard to say at this point.
What would be so it's an interesting way, I mean, it's one of multiple ways of funding, but what would be the driver in your mind? Would it be this sort of O&M thing, or would it have some split for investment, or how would you get at, not necessarily what the number is, but the funding that you're talking about, segregating a portion of the budget specifically annually for that? Would it be for O&M stuff, or would it be for capital investment, or both, or what?
I think for capital.
For capital?
Yeah.
So where would the O&M come from?
I don't know. I guess I'd have to talk to staff about it. I don't know.
I just think it's an interesting idea, because it has the potential to kind of continue to sort of float up with the general budget and accomplish at least sort of inflationary following kinds of stuff. The 4 million recommended service level, Dave, I'm kind of back to bugging you. Do we have any sense for whether that grows significantly if we had I'm not going to use the word complete, but $42 million more worth of physical infrastructure to maintain?
No, it's in the model. The growth in capital
Okay.
is in the growth in maintenance. So once it's built, it's in the maintenance.
So that's it, okay.
Yeah.
That's all I got for now, Mayor.
All right, we'll continue the conversation. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Wallach, give him a chance to weigh in yet, and then we'll try to get to the audience as soon as we can.
Thank you, Mayor. No prepared speech. I appreciate the comments of my colleagues listening, trying to take notes here. I write really bad, and I can't see really well, so I'll get through this. Our stormwater system, there's two factors. There's the revenue side, there's the expense side. I was one of two commissioners that voted against the stormwater utility originally, and I still do not support it.
Came back to do it again.
Oh, certainly. That was actually one of the reasons, because in talking to, and I know many of the people here are probably here to talk about their stormwater issues and that they do have problems, but by and large, out of the thousands of people that I reached out to, they oppose the stormwater utility. Now, you can argue logic, you can show colored pictures and slides and graphs and charts, and you can be very logical about it, but people don't like it. It's in the category of two words that are also anathema in our village, and that's vehicle stickers. They make sense. You can take a fee, and and they're perfectly legal because they're all over, but we don't have them, and we don't talk about them. Why? Because people don't want them. Stormwater utility, at least from my perspective, people don't want it, at least the vast majority. So that's one reason. The other one is that over the years of going to budget meetings, you start talking about pots of money. And when you're talking taxes, everybody on council staff, everybody's very aware of taxes because they know the residents get their tax bill and they're aware of taxes. And they pay attention to when the taxes go up and when they go down and the reasons. But when you have a fee, well, you know, when you have a tax system, you have to publish it in the paper, you have to have hearings, you go through all this process, and it's well known and people look at it. But when you got a stormwater fee, you could have 5 people here on a Tuesday night, and you could decide to raise it 8.5% over every year for 15 years. And most of the people I talked to had no idea that it was going to be 8.5% or 8.7% over 14 years, whatever the number is, or even though we may not have enforced that as we went on, but that's what happens. People don't pay attention to it.
Even though it's a line item on their water bill every other month?
Even that. I've had people say, why does my water cost so much? Well, are you talking about the water or the whole bill? Stormwater. Oh, fees. Why am I paying that? So people are aware of taxes. They're less aware of a stormwater utility. Also, when the stormwater utility was started, the sales pitch said it's going to include not just the residential folks, but we're going to expand it. So your overall bill is actually less because we're going to include more people. Well, as time went on, and one of the reasons that I opposed it too was the relationship we have with our nonprofits and the work they do, and we were going to force them to pay a tax or a fee. Technically, you know, legally maybe it was a fee, but hey, when I give money to the government, it's a tax. I don't care what you call it, it's a tax. And so I had a problem with that. And then when they decided to pull out some of the nonprofits and that, they also went, and I think Mayor Tully might agree with me that we went too far. We pulled out the tollway and certain other ones. Also the schools and park districts, Park District, they have a lot of property and there's a lot of stormwater there. But we weren't gonna charge them because, I don't know, I never understood the logic of, well, they're another taxing body. If we pass a fee on to them, then they'll just pass it on to the people. Well, yeah, that's the whole point, because part of this is behavior. And if you tell these other entities that, oh, we'll pick up the tab for you, they don't have to change their behavior. The idea is to change the behavior. So I have a problem with the stormwater fee and the 2 pots of money. Let's see. Also, now we can get into the expense side. And I look at the goals, and I'm wondering, we're going to cover 100% of the properties 95% of the time. Well, where are we on the? Oh, well, we got about 2,000 properties left. What's an event? What's 95%? If it rains on the, and it happens, believe it or not, it rains on the south side, it doesn't rain on the north side and vice versa. Does it have to be an inch? What's an event? How many events do we have? Have all sides of town been dropped on equally? I don't, I think it's not a very specific goal, I think. How do you measure it? And I don't think it can be measured. Plus, about half of those 2,000 properties are in LPDAs or floodplains.
Localized poor drainage area.
Right. So now now we're spending all this money to cover properties that are in those areas. Now granted, as the village grew, people did build on those areas and it's been there for a long time. But currently, we're pretty much landlocked, and so developers and builders and people, they want to live in Downers Grove, and they look for a vacant piece of property, and they build a doggone thing on a swamp or a pool, and then they expect all the taxpayers to drain it for them. I mean, this isn't Chicago where we have to drain all the water uphill. Change the direction of the water because some people built on swamps and pools. I have a problem with that. And there's a lot of money being spent along those lines. Plus the fact that, ever since I took office in 2005, 3 weeks, actually it was 3 weeks before I took my first oath, I heard from a elderly woman. I spent 45 minutes on the phone with her just about every month. She was crying because the house next door to her, the village allowed the construction, the house to be built 3 feet higher, and the water was now draining on, actually technically it was her son's property, and it hurt. And I understand water problems. I've had them in the past myself elsewhere. And I understand that. She was very upset, and she would cry every single month. But she wasn't the only one. People didn't cry, they complained. Why is the house on the other end of the block? We didn't have any problems until the house on the other end was built, and all of a sudden, several of my neighbors and myself are getting water problems. And I think a problem we have now with stormwater is we think we know how to solve these construction problems, yet I keep hearing again and again and again about construction causing water damage on their neighbors. And yet we're willing to spend millions of dollars to go solve some problem somewhere, you know, have all these big ticket items, and we keep shooting ourselves in the foot by allowing this construction that actually does damage to the neighborhood. And I think we have a responsibility to protect the neighborhood. So that's a problem I have on that end of the stormwater. Let's see, check my notes here. Hit the construction, maintenance. So anyway, I'll cover it up here. Comments about how do we fund it? When we talk about maintenance, the price tag was roughly $4 million. That comes out to about $180 to every taxpayer. Now, do you have to pay it, you know, right away up front? You know, are you going to pay that $180 next year? Are we going to spread it out over time? Whatever, you know, that's up to this council to decide. But when you're talking $4 million, you're talking about $160 per residence, per property. How you get there, you know, it's up to the council. Could we put it all on taxes? Possibly. Should we have a referendum? I could support a referendum. First chance I get to eliminate a stormwater utility fee, I will again vote against it, but I have a feeling that may not happen with this group, so anything that gets us closer to that, or just about anything that gets me closer to eliminating that fee is fine with me. And I think, let's see, there was the referendum, what other, there was, I think that might have been it. I appreciate the time. I appreciate the folks' time. I'm sure we'll hear some good feedback. That's pretty much where I stand.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Let's hear from the public.
Quick comment from Commissioner Jose before we go to the audience.
Actually, I've got a comment and a question. I'll start with the question for staff. Out of the 2,200 properties that we're talking about that still are dramatically underserved, what percentage of them, if you've got it handy, and I understand if you don't, what percentage of them are in a floodplain or a floodway?
You know, I think we asked and answered that question a couple weeks ago. I just don't have it off the top of my head, but if you give me a little bit of time, I'll look
I
it
believe it
up.
was, yeah, about 1,000.
I think that's what I remember, about half.
Okay, thank you. And I want to comment on something that Commissioner Waldeck said, and I think it's a very good point, that some of the problem is construction related, and we've taken some steps toward alleviating that with the additional requirements that we've heard some other folks complaining about with regard to dry wells and rain gardens and that sort of thing. If you expand beyond, I think it's 700 square feet of new impermeable space, perhaps the community might be interested in, and the council might be interested in, changing that 700 and shrinking it, which would be something I would be willing to consider as well. Thanks, Mayor.
All right, well, this conversation isn't concluded by any stretch of the imagination, but I do want to invite in comments and questions from the audience. But two things, first of all. Number one, thank you for your patience. I do think it was worthwhile having the opportunity to hear at least what's initially on the minds or the questions or comments or viewpoints of the village council, because I think it will help inform the comments that are made rather than us sitting here stone-faced and silent and you're not getting some idea of what's rattling around in our heads. But I don't think anybody's, we're not deciding anything tonight. Part of this conversation is to hear what you have to think. But the second thing I'd like to ask of everyone is when you step up, whether you like utility, you hate a utility, you want to pay more property taxes, you want to pay no property taxes, you want to fix flooding, you don't want to fix flooding, whatever your concern is, if you also have in mind a suggestion of how to do something better, in other words, if you don't like the utility, what would you be okay with? If you don't want to do stormwater, what would you say to the people who have flooding problems? I'd appreciate it if we could hear not just concerns or criticisms, but also solutions. I think that would be most helpful for us to hear what's on your mind. So with that, I would ask anyone who has any questions or comments on this topic to please come up to the podium. Once again, introduce yourself. We'd love to hear from you. As you can see, this is a very complicated, multifaceted issue that has been kicking around our community for some time. And it's one of those things that there's not one side or the other side. There's probably 17 different opinions on this, and all of them are right. So with that, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Dave Gorman, 5401 Fairview Avenue. I'm chair of the Downers Grove Stormwater and Floodplain Oversight Committee. I've served on that committee and the Stormwater Utility Exploratory Committee since 2003. We've had, as you've heard me say last year, many meetings with people following floods. At the worst, it was about 200 people. Many in tears. Some of you, I'm sure, have been to our meetings. We're very excited about the opportunity that the stormwater utility has created with the steady funding source. And I've changed my comments. This is an excellent discussion. It was very helpful to hear your thoughts and the willingness to have a consensus and learn more. We've learned a lot on our committee through the discussions. First, I want to say that the very transparency of a fee compared to a tax invites this kind of controversy. And the sunlight that we would like to see on all government expenditures is more on a stormwater utility fee than funding these operations out of the mess of property taxes or sales taxes or whatever other pot of money you might go to. That said, it is something that is a concern, the increases, but we do believe that ignoring the maintenance and operation and the projects that have been identified by professional engineers, myself and a number of the others on the committee are here. We're professional engineers also. We've heard the issues. We understand quite a lot of them. These are things that we need to do, and we really appreciate your attention to that. I would also like to say, just because I don't personally have a problem at my house with stormwater, doesn't mean I don't have a proportional responsibility for the stormwater system and the many systems that we have. To be clear, like it was mentioned, we don't have a perfect system, and we have many projects in many areas. But just because I don't have a project that will benefit my property doesn't mean that I, as a Downers Grove resident, don't have responsibility for the water that runs off my property or the water that runs off the streets that I drive on, the network that we all rely on. A fee seems to be an equitable way to handle this. Property taxes, less so, and less, again, transparent. The steady funding is very useful for budgeting, for living, bonds, and it's allowing us to march through all those projects that we need to do. And I want to make sure that we're not just talking about helping those people in the LPDA, the poor drainage areas. This is about maintaining our whole system, our whole village. Some of those projects will help those areas, but some of that water came from my property. And it's en route through other pipes and facilities down to the river in either way. I saw firsthand a lot of flooding in 2013, and we really want to make progress on that, and we appreciate your assistance with that. This is a difficult conversation to have. A lot of people in the community don't understand the difference between a tax and a fee other than they see the fee. And so I hope that there is some recognition of the need that's out there and that the fee is an equitable, fair, steady funding that's very useful for the capital process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gorman. Other questions or comments from the audience? Please. Welcome. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm not going to be very good at this because...
That's all right. Neither are we. Please, go ahead.
Well, my name is Joe Janicek. I live right along St. Joseph Creek, right off of Brookbank Avenue. So I've seen the water rise every year. I've been there for 24 years. The creek used to be dry for maybe half the year, or at least 4 months out of the year. But steadily, since down the creek, nobody's done any maintenance. The water's been stagnant now, say every year it raises, comes up another inch or two because lack of maintenance. Now, when I first moved into the neighborhood 24 years ago, I came to City Hall here at the village and asked whose job was it to maintain the creek. And they said it was the property owners. So I tried to do what I can for the creek that borders my property, that goes through my property, but downstream, nobody's done anything for 24 years. And that property does belong to the city, from what I understand. And it's basically caused it to be a floodplain now, where there was a nice lawn in my neighbor's yard to the west. It's a nice duck pond now. And I don't mind that so much, but it's a shame that because of lack of maintenance, it's come to this. I enjoy the creek. It's nice to have along the side of the house, but a few years back when we had that big flood, we had to spend $17,000 on the basement to reinforce the foundation that cracked. So it's an issue with neighbors downstream, which is the city. Now, a solution to that, I'm going to ask you, would you allow people to volunteer to clean that creek out through that swamp area? I'm retired now, so if I could do a couple feet a day, I'd be happy. And then I wouldn't worry every time it rained. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Janasek, and appreciate your comments, and we'll take the question and the answer into account as well. Other questions or comments from members of the audience, please? It's only 9:15. This was pretty short.
Anyhow.
Good evening. Welcome.
John Spreet, 1209 Jefferson. I live on the other side of Joe, and I've done a little homework. We'll pull up page 1. I've got a handout here, council, which I'll explain here shortly. I think I first got involved in this thing when I found out my neighbor was paying half of what I was for the stormwater fee. And when I looked into it, I found out that I'm being penalized for having a wood deck. Then I found out I'm also being penalized for having a large piece of property. So that started my investigation into what do other communities do. And on the 16th, I've outlined the whole series of those issues that I've shown on that sheet. And led me to a few really basic observations. One is the size of your non-impervious area really is not what determines your stormwater management. It's the size of your property and how it's maintained. A large property that has a series of rain gardens or rain gardens that take care of the water and stormwater really don't contribute that much to your stormwater management system. Whereas a small property, a large house on the small property does. So you really have to take the entire property into consideration, not just the non-impervious areas. And a point being, our impervious wood deck is probably less impervious than Grove Street right now, that I know we spend a lot of money on. So I have a series of initiatives, and right now I'm just going to kind of zoom in on a couple of topics in here in more detail than I did at the last meeting. And that basically being what I just described. The calculations just are incomplete and incompatible with stormwater management. On page 3, and I'm doing more of a visual on this as opposed to the technical information I provided previously. The center property is ours. This is the drawing that the village staff used to calculate our non-impervious property. The blue lines are our property lines, and the green is what the village has interpreted being our non-impervious area. The cross-hatched area is our wood deck that I am disputing being part of this. But that's what throws us into the larger category. What this drawing does not show is the garden areas in the yard. And the easiest thing I can think of is just put your hand over the bottom of this whole sheet, and that will show you the comparison of large property versus the smaller properties and how it's impacted. The next page, the printouts are better than the overhead, sorry about that, shows kind of the topography of the property, with St. Joseph Creek running along the very bottom of the sheet, and rainwater angling toward the southwest into the neighbor's yard, which is a floodplain. The bottom line, very little water from our properties enters the stormwater system. It all flows toward basically the neighbor's yard and into parts of ours with ever-increasing frequency. Part of my research, when I found looking at other communities, what they do is it all ties in with best practices, which is all part of it. Downers Grove's mentioned that. I didn't know any of this stuff existed until it got my attention, and I looked at the ordinance. You have different incentives for different things, from rain barrels to rain gardens to storing stormwater on your own property. So I'm looking forward to the village sending me a check for storing the stormwater on our properties.
That's me.
But
I'll get a bigger one than both of you. I'll explain. Go ahead.
good. We've got a boat for you. Anyhow.
Come visit my house, 5413 Main Street. Let me show you something when you have a chance.
Anyhow. I've given examples of some of these, like San Antonio, Texas, and I started reading through their stuff. It's a little more user-friendly than some. And they seem to have an outreach program with the communities to develop different incentives and different best management practices, which are targeted to be 75% of stormwater on your own property. We certainly meet that. But we're still paying the stormwater fee, double. Regarding the best in practices, McDonald Farm is a great resource if nobody's been there. They have examples of all of this stuff there, from rain gardens and impervious concrete to windmills and everything. Different times of the year they sponsor different groups and vendors to come in. And DuPage County has a huge initiative. Theirs are larger projects, but they welcome people to come and help out, basically. And of course, Morton Arboretum is the best one for plants. One of the things I did find is that our pretty picture of a rain garden in our own website that references how to make a rain garden is great. But a $300 incentive to build this $5,000 to $8,000 rain garden in your yard is a little, that's not much of an incentive. What I've found is that smaller rain gardens are recommended in strategic areas where people can, one, do them yourself, and it's a lot less cost over time. And where if they're placed strategically, if you know your water flow patterns, you can actually build them in areas that can absorb the water, flow it, channel it better than a single rain garden with less overall maintenance. Which leads to my next topic, which I'm following Joe here, the swamp. It's an ever-increasing problem because it's not maintained. Cattails are taking over, which introduces more and more mosquitoes, which means more and more muskrats, which means more and more coyotes, less and less ducks, less and less geese, and that's our state. The creek bed now is 8 inches higher than it was about 5 years ago. I've been measuring it, and I've sent that information to the council previously too, because water comes up to it and then just backflows into our yards. It's really not a wetland. Downers Grove, DuPage County last year sponsored a trashy watershed workshop. And that's the best definition of that property there that I can think of, because that's what it is. It's really not a wetland by definition. There's a lot of information on wetlands. I didn't include all that in here. It'd be another 20 pages, just the legal definitions of it. So I researched it, well, anyhow, the swamp I've discussed with various village officials, had the stormwater group out, and what I hear is you can't touch it, you need surveys, you need permits, you need funding. So I went to the county and I started researching their 155-page document. I got lost in that one, so I called the county, and they referred me to a presentation that they did, which is the predecessor for developing the current county regulations, which is a little easier for me to read. And page 5 of this, next, is halfway through their document, they get in, with a lot of details, they get into these next 3 pages, kind of define that, well, if you can't do it all, do something. And some of the highlights of those are here. Then the last few pages are the flow chart from their actual document. And for me, a flow chart's a little easier to read. But the far right circle at least gives options to do projects in a phased pattern, you know, look at it and phase things in. I mean, maybe part of the swamp can be cleaned out to the point where we at least get water to flow. Right now, it's almost impossible to clean anything out of it. It just collects trash. I used to get in there and clean it out a bit, but I can't even get in there anymore. I've got a rash the last time I was in there, and I just kind of am shy to get into there. And it's, with 8 and 10 foot high cattails, I can't do anything in there anymore. And the water channel goes into it and just stops. And it hasn't really dried out much in the last few years as a result. And it's harder to sit out in the backyard now with all the mosquitoes. So that's kind of just a summary of those details. I have a lot more information. With a pizza and a beer, I could be here all night, but that's probably not what we want to do. But I have a lot more information. It's ongoing, and I'd like to see something rectified. The advantage of probably having a separate stormwater fee is it probably has gotten some people's attention to do some best management practice work. Look at rain gardens, look at other incentives, look at permeable pavers. Maybe we'd like to put a windmill in the backyard. That might work, you know. It might help. But that's it for tonight. Thank you. I look forward to the next meeting. I'll have a lot more information.
Thank you very much. Appreciate all that, and look forward to seeing you at the next one. You raised, in the conversational spirit that we're having this discussion tonight, you raised a number of different issues that I just want to add some more information for everybody's benefit. The equity issue that both you mentioned and Mr. Gorman mentioned, at least as originally conceived, and Commissioner White commented a little bit on this from his perspective, but the original concept was that between a property tax and a fee, under the property tax system that was in place in 2013 before we had the stormwater utility, our information showed that even though single-family residential properties only contribute approximately 50% of the stormwater runoff as that was defined at the time, they were paying about 70% of the financial burden to manage it. And there was an inequity that was viewed there that the utility at least tried to even out and spread out over more parcels and deal with that inequity. The other thing that you mentioned was, you know, how we measure impermeable area for purposes of calculating what the ERUs are for runoff. And this is something you're not unique in raising this issue. Well, why does my pool count for this? Why do my eaves count for that? Why does my deck count for this? And the reality is that calculating how you determine the fee is something that can be done a number of different ways. And I remember when we worked with our consultant back in 2012, 2011, if you look across the country, even in Illinois, there's a variety of different ways that different communities do it, and I'm glad that you researched this. Some communities just simply don't measure at all. They just say everybody's going to pay a flat fee. I don't care how big your property is. I don't care if you're commercial, residential, or I don't care if you're a parking lot. You're paying the same amount. So there's no, doesn't matter. Everybody pays the same thing. Well, and other towns would go to great lengths to actually try to figure out the differences between parcel A and parcel B and parcel C. The problem with that, though, is then you get into a lot of time and expensive administration, where you're actually trying to look at every single parcel and figure out how it's different than the neighbor, than the neighbor, than the neighbor. That requires staff, and then you have to continually update it.
You had to do that to start with. to keep
No,
it
actually, we
as is.
didn't. Actually, we didn't. That was the beauty of it. To keep administrative costs down, we simply used the GPS information from DuPage County, which is where the picture that you had up there of the outlines
Right.
around the houses, that's where it comes from. It's not a perfect measurement, you're absolutely right. We were trying to find something that would serve as a reasonable proxy for literally going out and, what do you have in your yard, and how many do you have this? Because if we had to do that for every single, how many parcels do we have?
But that
Residential parcels,
same,
maybe
that
thousands and
same
thousands.
drawing shows the property size.
Well, right, but you then have to break it down and have a much more complicated system, which then has to be maintained. Someone would have to come out to your house every year and make sure you hadn't added to your deck or reduced your deck. It just creates more administrative, and one thing everyone hates is spending money on administration and bureaucracy. And again, I'm not defending it, I'm just making an
Well,
observation.
I represent,
It was
research
decided-
some of those,
Yeah,
like
it was-
San Antonio, Texas seems to be a little more
Well, and again,
comprehensive.
everybody could do it. You could eliminate the administration altogether by simply saying you pay $20, period. Everybody pays $20.
I'll settle for $20.
Or every month? Every month?
No, I thought you were gonna pay me to store the stormwater on my property.
No, but I just want to explain, that was just what was arrived at the time to try to keep the administrative bureaucracy as minimal as possible, and just using basically what the GPS overhead showed as the impermeable area, understanding it's not
Perfectly
perfect.
understand that, but it's wrong.
Well, of course it's wrong, because it's not perfect. The only way for it to be right would be to individually measure each and every parcel in the entire community, which, is that possible? Sure it is. It would dwarf the.
That information's on the same overhead.
But then it changes every year. If you put on an addition, if you
My
add a
property
pool.
size don't change.
But what's on the property does change. You change your driveway, you add this, at any rate. I'm not defending it, I'm simply explaining that was it. So one of the things we've always said is that we could tweak it to deal with some of those issues. And there may be even tweaks that could deal with the legality issue. I just want to point that out. The other thing about, in credits, we've talked about credits as well as.
There's a point, though, on that last point.
Yeah, sure.
Be more conversational. Inequities in calculating impervious area seems to me, okay, first, let me back up a little bit. My number one goal for this entire conversation is that when we're finished with the process and go into 2017, there's widespread community support for the direction that we take. That it's not four of us saying, this is our choice, but that there's widespread community support. In that vein, inequities in how impervious area is calculated, the type of thing that you talk about, and other people have written to us and said the way my impervious area calculated isn't fair. It's my opinion, and others may disagree, it's simply my opinion, that the discontent that generates is a whole lot less when the ERU is under $10 versus the ERU being $30. So by keeping the stormwater utility at a lower number, the consequence to you of that inequity is lower. But as the stormwater utility grows by leaps and bounds to being eventually 3 times what it is now, that inequity, in my opinion, will rankle people more than it does now, and that undermines the political legitimacy of the stormwater utility. And it's more important as the numbers get bigger that the precision get better, but to make the precision better has more administrative overhead, which is why I'm dead opposed to vehicle stickers, that the cost of administering vehicle stickers far exceeds the revenue.
Well, and that was at least the thinking at the time. And again,
So as we grow it, we have a greater obligation to be more precise, and that adds to our overhead.
Right. Well, the controversy part of it actually is quite interesting. The comment was made earlier that by actually breaking it out and having this discussion, it's far more transparent and accountable than it ever was. It used to be buried in your property tax. Nobody said boo. You didn't know what it was. And guess what? You were paying the same. As your neighbor who had a parking lot, twice the impervious area as you, may have had a lower assessed valuation. They were paying less than you, and you were picking up their burden. So a lot of people were carrying other people's burdens beforehand, just didn't know it. Now it's the light's on. At any rate, the other thing I just want to point out is very quickly, I feel your pain on the storing the stormwater, and I promise I'd come back to my property. I have 9 immediate neighbors. 9 immediate neighbors that join my property. Most of those houses were built before 1965, before we had before we had a zoning ordinance. So literally, there are people that have garages that are built right on the property line because it was permissible back then. And they have gutters. Those gutters drain right onto my yard. My yard collects water from 9 different parcels. Yet I'm pretty sure I pay more in a stormwater utility fee than you do. However, you go to my driveway and you'll see during a good rain, there's water running down the street, right into Main Street down the corner. So is there runoff from my property even though I've got a lake in the back? You betcha. Again, is this perfect? No. But it was the most reasonable system we could come up with at the time that tried to balance a lot of different competing concerns and equities. I don't think it was ever imagined that it would never, ever be adjusted as we got experience in the field for how things were working. Which is one of the reasons why I continue to support it, because I think that all these different things can be adjusted. Credits can be adjusted, incentives can be adjusted. I agree with you 100% with respect to this raising awareness of stormwater management and personal responsibility for managing one's stormwater on their property. I think we've had a conversation as a community that never existed before. There's lots of advantages to it, but again, it could be tweaked. So I just want to point that out, that it was never designed to be perfect.
That could be improved with more direct outreach to the.
You know what? That's a very good suggestion.
That would help a
very good
lot
suggestion.
in understanding and to get people
Yeah,
to do more.
fair point. Fair
little
point.
expense.
Fair point. Those are all things that
Disregarding
could
the
be
fees
done.
in the, I don't know, 15, 20 communities that I've researched, their average fees are like $4 or $5 a month.
All right, well, it may be that they just have different needs or they fund things differently. I'd have to look at
Large
the whys.
communities, medium-sized communities, I've got some examples there, from
Right.
Raleigh to San Antonio to even Buffalo Grove to,
Right.
those are ones that just seem to stand out.
And at the time, just so you know, we did look at other, there are more communities in Illinois that have stormwater utilities than were back when we adopted one, but we did look at other communities in Illinois because obviously we're very different weather patterns than San Antonio and other places. On that note, I just want to point out that you mentioned the water levels in the creek. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe I read somewhere that for many years there was deep concern about the levels in Lake Michigan going down dangerously low. But because of the rainfall that we've experienced in this area in the last X number of years, I believe, don't quote me on this, that the levels of water in Lake Michigan are now higher than historic levels. So we went from being dangerously low to now high. So it doesn't surprise me that creek levels are high.
It was snow also.
Whatever the source. And again, I'm
Well, it's the impact in our area, the tornado came through there too and took down all the trees, so that has an impact as well in water on our property.
And last
That
question,
still doesn't
last
impact
issue, the
the water sitting in the
wetland
creek.
permitting, that is a really dicey area. I'd like to know more about it. I know the county can be, and more than the county, can be very demanding when it comes to that, and I don't even know if it's possible to do partial. I just don't know. I'd want to look into it. Because I
What
think
I've
before you
discussed
can even
with the
do
county
anything in a
is
wetland, you're supposed to get all the permits.
There's a rumor that there may be some potential help that the county can provide for doing something. Don't know what, but that's going to be a topic for a later discussion. I'm still researching that, so.
The county is actually, this is a whole nother conversation for another day. I'll sit down with that beer and that pizza with you, and I can tell you about the county perspective.
I got plenty of paper.
Hands off.
Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Spreet mentioned best practices and the incentives and the size of them. I had proposed increasing those significantly to kind of incentivize the idea of more rain gardens, more rain barrels, more dry wells, et cetera. That idea didn't carry the day at the time, but I think the tone has changed. Given prior statements when this council was initially seated, I expected that the stormwater utility would cease to exist rather rapidly. It doesn't seem to be the case anymore. I hope that my colleagues will consider once again such expansions of the incentives that Mr. Spreet talked about and that I had proposed previously. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is William Wicklander, 805 Old Orchard Avenue, proud resident of Downers Grove for 10 years, homeowner. Mayor Tully and the council, thank you for your time to hear public comments tonight on this subject. I'm also a volunteer along with 6 of us on the Stormwater Floodplain Oversight Committee as well. I got involved in the village. I put my name on the website, said, hey, if you want to get involved, put your name in. Bob Barnett, commissioner, said, hey, let's go to coffee, and for the last 3 years I've been doing that. And I learned a lot, because to Commissioner Olson's comment earlier, he opposes raising taxes. I don't like paying taxes. You know, I don't know about anybody else here, but I hate paying fees and not knowing where it's going. I've learned quite a bit over the last 3 years about stormwater and floodplain and all this stuff. I'm not an engineer. I'm a sales guy. I've got a wife. I've got kids. I'm a father. I'm a husband. You know, I'm just an average guy. And I learned a lot about this fee because I really didn't like getting an extra $10 on my bill every month on my water. It's like, that's $120. That pays for a lot of diapers. You know, that could be, that could be a Bears game, or maybe maybe at least the parking for the Cubs game or something, whatever. I just didn't like the fact I'm paying this fee. But as I learned is to a couple of your commissioners' comments previously is that due to disregard for maintenance of the system in past councils, probably 20 or 30 years, we're now at a point where this is a big problem later. And if we don't continue to address this problem now with a fee like a stormwater fee, utility fee that doesn't go to the state and then come back to us at 75 or 65% or whatever we give them, and who knows if we'll get that money back, by having a stormwater utility fee, those funds are a portion, correct me if I'm wrong, can only be spent on stormwater utility fee and the maintenance of the system or capital improvements if we so choose. And I also believe that one of the reasons why this fee and these long-term capital projects have come about was a village plan or some type of plan. Was there a report that was done in 2008, 2009, 2010 that identified these long-term goals of the village? Can you help me on that?
I think that was the watershed improvement plan.
Watershed
What used to be known
improvement
as
plan,
the WIP.
which includes the village master plan long-term. And these are costs that we're going to have eventually, no matter what. I mean, these fees, this expense we're going to have. And if we don't pay the money now, in my opinion, based on what I've learned in the past 3 years, because there are some really smart engineers that are involved in other villages, and they've been involved in this water stuff. We have a great staff. Karen, she's there. She knows more about this stuff. If you ever have a question, you can probably ask her. She'll call. She's great. But it's my understanding, I don't like paying taxes, I don't like paying fees, but it's my understanding, if we don't invest now, the cost to doing this later is exponentially greater than if we don't do it now. And that's just my opinion, is learning what I've learned as a resident of the village. One thing I do take pride in is, as we said, you got that nice video when you start the meeting. We're a great village. We have the lowest unemployment. We've got great businesses. We're fiscally responsible. We're AAA bond rating. Let's keep the village that way. And I think long-term success of the village, this fee should continue. I was disappointed to hear that the council decided not to do the 8.5% recommended fee increase this year, because that's 8.5% we're never going to get back in order to get the funding. So it's just personal.
We've never done that in any year.
No.
Recommended, it's never been raised.
All right, so it's never been raised. But so I just wanted to say that, I'm not, I hate paying fees. I don't get paid to go to this meeting once every couple months or anything like that. I invest my time and I care about the village. I'm proud to be a resident of Downers Grove, and I want to see the village here for future generations, and to continue to be fiscally responsible and a great place to live, raise a family, and work. So that's all I've got. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Likewise, thank you very much for being here. Yeah. It was so soft, I almost didn't hear it. But yes, please, no applause either way. Good evening, welcome.
Hi, I'm Cat Canis, 1846 Grant Street in Downers. And it is a good village, and I appreciate you guys taking the time to think about it and take your time, not just decide off the cuff whether to do something. But I got 4 things that I just, are thinking about listening to all this. I think maybe Commissioner Olson alluded to the fact that, it's been called a fee, but I've always considered it a tax, and, because it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck. It's a tax. There's no way to avoid it if you avoid property, if you own property. So it's a tax. But that's okay. I think the fee's doing. I think it's okay to continue. I think it's it's doing its job in the sense of people. Somebody else mentioned making people pay more attention to stormwater management, literally managing on their own property if possible, and where it's going when it's not staying on their property, et cetera. And I like the idea of it having incentives for people to control their runoff, where it's whatever. 5 years ago, nobody thought about that, right? You ran off someplace, and it was like, garbage 10 years ago. Nobody recycled, right? You just put it out on the curb and it disappears. So now we're moving in the right direction, then. So somebody else mentioned, a number of people mentioned equity and being equitable, and I think that's important because my wife and I have lived on our property for a long time, more than 25 years, and so just about every day I see water events, and I can truthfully say over the course of time, for a number of reasons, lots of reasons, rainfall variation, but a lot of it has to do with construction, and in fact, in our neighborhood, demolition as well, which is an interesting side story. But water runoff has generally increased, despite all the efforts of the last 20 years, and I mean literally 20 years worth of engineering in this village. And for that matter, 25 years. In fact, I remember in 1988 calling the village engineer at that time and arguing with him over the phone. He said, well, he's making smart remarks to me like, well, we can't make water run uphill. Yeah, thanks for that insight. But literally, over 25 years, the general trend is runoff has increased, you know, and somebody mentioned cattails. When we first lived on our property, like more than 25 years ago, there was no cattails whatsoever. I used to mow the lawn in the low part, at least 4 or 5 times a summer. Now, the last 5 years, I never mow that lawn. There's no lawn to mow. It's all cattails. They came out of nowhere. I didn't plant them. It was like, it was kind of, I mean, biologically, it's kind of an interesting phenomenon, but you don't even have to plant them. They just show up. So, you know, and then the fact that the other thing that bothers me is like the last couple of years, the village spent money to literally destroy houses in a low spot on Lee Avenue there. Similar to what the DuPage County did up at Flowerfield, bought houses, tore them down. I understand that. But the fact is, on the other side of the street, the newbies on the street, the big, large houses that they let get built in the last 15 years, they won. They're there. They're standing there. The little guys that were down there before, that existed since whatever, 1980, maybe earlier, they're literally gone and demolished. So it's like, you look at that and you say, is this management system really working well here? It's you know, visually it doesn't look like it. So, but back to equity. You mentioned you had 9 properties dumping on your water under your place. And I think I got a little bit more, actually. I got like 15 upstream from me. And for years and years and years, actually decades literally, our property has been accepting that water. So in all intents and purposes, our property is part of the stormwater management system. So, okay, but, you know, but then when the stormwater utility comes around, it says, okay, you know, the way I read it, it's like, okay, Mr. Conness, you know, it's nice that you were part of the system for all these years, but now we're going to actually pay you, or make you pay to be part of the system.
So in all fairness, you were paying through your property taxes.
Right.
So it's not that you just started paying.
Technically true. Technically true.
Everybody was paying.
Right.
You were paying in a different way.
Well,
you just didn't know it because you didn't see it.
Well, let me put it this way. Let me rephrase. So for years and years and years, we were making a contribution in 2 forms. The property taxes, as you say, as well as our property being provided, the use of our property by stormwater runoff from neighbors, like you, your neighbors, at no cost to the village. You could look at it that way. So there was 2 contributions. Now, so then to get the stormwater utility fee, and this is the part that stuck in my craw, like, okay, now you, Mr. Connors, you got to pay extra for the privilege of being part of our stormwater management system. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, although
it sticks in my craw.
Although again, in fairness, you were already paying for it, but you were paying based on the value of your home as opposed to any runoff. You just didn't know it.
Technically true, but what I'm trying to say is I'm getting back to the equity point. It's like, okay, fine, you know, I got to pay stormwater. I philosophically I'm okay with that, which as I mentioned, but and I'm not, you know, I think Joe mentioned it, other people that are accepting runoff, and in my case, it's 90%, I'd say easily 95% net acceptance of runoff as opposed to producing runoff. Our property, like, produces almost damn near nil contribution to runoff to the street. We're like, you know, so if you want to talk about real equity, you and I should be getting paid by the village. So that's...
Yeah, that would be an impossible system to manage.
I don't know about that. I mean, if the village staff, if the engineering staff knows anything, they know where stormwater is going in general. And in fact, it's here's the other thing that sticks in my craw that makes it even worse. It's like, it's not just stormwater. I could go out some certain days, sunny days in the past 5 years. I go over and see the open ditch that between my neighbor and some of my neighbors in the same situation, actually. I can see water running down the ditch. I go, wait, what's wrong with this picture? Sun's out. There's water running in this ditch. What the hell's going on here? So I walk upstream, and some guy upstream, he's got a hose or he's emptying a swimming pool into the street, which has a nice curb and gutter. But the gutter, if you look underneath it, and the village engineering staff knows this, it flows into that open ditch into my backyard and some of my neighbors' backyard as well. So it's not even stormwater, it's more than stormwater. So that's where the equity part really resonates with me, you know. If the village can work on that, making it more more equitable, I would appreciate that. And the last part, I think Commissioner Waldeck mentioned this to some extent. You know, the flip side of this, you know, like sort of like energy. You can either build bigger power plants or you can conserve energy. Well, similarly with stormwater management, you can either, you know, spend a lot of money on dealing with managing the runoff, or you can produce less runoff at the source, which is a good concept. But when it comes to the village permits, the source problem is development. You know, building construction, residential construction, commercial construction, school construction, parking lots, all that stuff, all those people that do that and have been doing it, they'll want to continue doing it. And it's part of development. You want more sales tax? Well, usually that means bigger parking lots, bigger buildings, whatever. All those forces are still there. So the village needs to really carefully manage those so that, you know, the right hand, which is the people doing the building permits, really cooperates with what the left hand is doing, but left hand being stormwater management, building head walls and pipes to control storm. So that's I don't know how well coordinated it is today, but just visually over the past 25 years, you know, there's a lot of room for improvement there. So I'd like to concentrate that kind of improvement.
Thank you very much for your comments. On that last point, you're right. It's important not just to manage the runoff, but to also manage the source of the runoff. And there has been an evolution in that thinking over time. It wasn't always that way. There was, back in the day, we allowed lot splits willy-nilly around here, actually reducing the space between improvements on property, and that's changed. And we used to allow flag lots back in the days when everything was being chopped up as quickly as it could. That's changed. We don't allow flag lots anymore. We're requiring minimum setbacks between homes. Lot splits are infrequent. Very few exceptions. I haven't seen one in 10 years. I think a lot of that is out of recognition of the more impermeable space you create, you're actually contributing to the problem. There have been changes over time in terms of residential redevelopment, downspout and some pump discharge. Commissioner Jose mentioned something a moment ago. So that thinking has evolved because that is a very good point. Is you don't want to create more problem and then have to pay to fix it as much as you can. So the village regulations and building viewpoints have evolved in that. Again, going back to 1965, people were allowed to build right on the lot line and discharge a downspout right on their neighbor's yard. Don't do that anymore. But there are still those homes that were built pre-1965 that still exist because we have a very eclectic housing stock here in the community. But that is a very good point. I think you'll find this council and prior councils agree with you, and there's been an evolution of trying to reduce the number of problems that we then have to address through a stormwater utility or property taxes or whatever. So thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me express my opinion on the effectiveness and accuracy of the stormwater runoff fees. My name's Angelo Manzuelo. I live at 4935 Northcott. One thing it's been bandied about, whether it's a tax or a fee, it's a fee. And if you try telling the IRS it's a fee, they'll say, oh, that it's a tax. They'll say, no, it's a fee. You can't deduct that. The other thing, too, is Commissioner Olson stated that you can't expect to get something for nothing. Unfortunately, I've been getting nothing for something for a long time. That would be like going to Burger King, well, let's keep it anonymous, Burger Shack, and saying, give me, here's my money for some hamburgers, a lot of hamburgers. do that once a month and not get any hamburgers for 2 years. Keep going back month after month, not getting a hamburger. And the worst part is, I don't like hamburgers. And then they're going to say, well, now the cost of hamburgers is going up. You're going to have to pay more for your hamburgers. And speaking of that, the geometric progression for your taxes, that $10 is going to become 20 in about 8 years. And it's going to triple in, I don't know, that's as far as my mathematic calculations can go on Tuesday night. I think Tuesday night, it's probably 13 years, it'll triple in 13 years. I attended the first stormwater meeting 3 years ago, I think, and I had the same questions and doubts that I have now. Karen was there, I talked to her, she gave her presentation, and then she took questions. She was immediately barraged by, questions and complaints. I asked a few questions, how the square footage was determined and what the alternatives to rain barrels and rain gardens and pavers were. There were none at the time. Well, she was kind of getting cornered, and I was kind of feeling sorry for her, so I just left her alone, at least until lately. I researched, well, the property, my street on Northcott continually floods. It floods every time it rains, pretty much. Instead of me telling you, I can show you pictures, that's the way it looks when there's a rain. The good thing about it is, when that happens, I can tell when my satellite signal goes out, I know it's time to go down to the storm sewer and make sure it's clear. So it's kind of an alarm, built-in alarm. What did I do with the rest of that stuff? Okay. I've got the stormwater fee bases, and I've got the aerial view maps from the DuPage County, just as he had. So first, the accuracy, and feel free to jump in and correct me if I'm misrepresenting your methodology. The aerial photography is received from the County of DuPage, and they're given to the Downers Grove GIS department to determine the permeable and non-permeable area. The GIS tech picks approximate points visually on the aerial photograph, which he had on the screen. I've got it here, but a lot smaller scale. So basically what he's doing is eyeballing it. And unless you have professional geological survey mapping equipment, you're only guessing the area. The accuracy of the approximation, their approximation, is between 5 and 20%. And that's not even including the difference between the building's overhangs and the building footprint, which, as you saw in the Benton house, the overhang could be pretty considerable. So all the GIS tech is looking at is the roof. In my 3 attempts, my accuracy was between 2 and 14%, and I've been doing this for a lot of years. Let's say 30 plus or minus. I don't want to really say how many, but a lot. My first attempt was 1,655 square feet, and that was a 14% error. And that's considering that I'm familiar with my roof line and everything else that's there. My second attempt was 1,529 square feet. That was a 6% error. Third attempt, 1,479 square feet. That's 2% error. The actual measured square footage is 1,448 square feet of the building footprint. Now, it's unlikely that the GIS tech is going to check his work 2 times. So that's, there's your inaccuracy. The pictures, like I said, I can give you a lot of pictures, and it doesn't look as bad as some of the pictures that were up on the stormwater presentation before, at least until someone drives up my neighbor's driveway, across my lawn, and down the other neighbor's driveway to avoid the lake. Flooded basements, yeah, there have been flooded basements, but I'm not at liberty to discuss whose basements got flooded. the end is, you can slap a Band-Aid on this thing with rain barrels and rain gardens, which are very nice, but it doesn't solve the problem. That's kind of nipping it up at the top of the hierarchy. But here I am down at the bottom of the hierarchy with a 5-gallon bucket trying to bail out the street, or with a rake trying to get the stormwater sewer cleared. But even when it is cleared, it still doesn't drain. Even when it's perfectly clear, it still doesn't drain. What I did years ago was take the initiative to control the stormwater runoff from my own house, from my own gutters, and I created a seepage field in front. Well, of course, that's to water the grass too, so it's kind of mutually beneficial to keep the rainwater from going into the Lake Northcott and to keep my front lawn watered. That alleviated the rice paddy in the backyard, which is, you know, something you can have talk to your neighbors about doing. Have their garage run into a perforated pipe underground into a rain garden if you want.
We just planted river birches.
Pardon me?
We just planted lots of river birches.
Yeah.
They're doing very well.
Good. That's it. Please, the stormwater runoff program is not working. Please reevaluate it. And please don't steamroll it through without considering its usefulness or its lack thereof. And don't make homeowners pay more for something that's not working and wasn't really wanted in the first place. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manzuelo. Thank you for being here. Appreciate your comments. Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. Tim Nash, 42229L. We may be in the 7th inning stretch. I don't know if anybody needs to stand up and stretch their arms. Before I start, I want to take this opportunity. I've been meaning for years to come here and just say how much I appreciate the Public Works teams that come out. Every time my basement is flooding, they come out and pump water out of my lawn. They've always been kind and courteous and helpful, and I've always meant to come here and just publicly say that, so I just want to take this opportunity while I am here. In the presentation, the long presentation of the document on the website, there's a portion in there that says that 2/3 of the village is served by storm sewers and 1/3 is served by ditches and culverts. There's another portion that's none of the above. And I live in a portion of Downers, which is none of the above. We have no storm sewers, no ditches, no culverts, nothing in the way of infrastructure to divert water from coming onto our properties. And so I just wanted to comment that for myself and my neighbors, we have spent tens of thousands of dollars to do what we can on our own properties. Landscaping, retaining walls, French drains, super large, triple redundant sump pumps, everything you can do, everything that we can do on our own property, we have done. Yet, of course, when we have large rain events, we still flood because there's nothing to prevent the water from coming on our properties. And that's where we look to the village, right? We can't do any more, and we need your help in this critical infrastructure, ditches, culverts, pipes, whatever it would be, to help us in this situation. It's quite concerning to hear this talk about only funding the existing storm water infrastructure, because this does nothing for me. I don't have an infrastructure to maintain, so this does not help me at all. And I assume that the other projects that are on the list are in the same situation. So I just wanted to come here and say, when you're making decisions about what to do with the stormwater utility, to really think about the needs of these projects and not just funding the maintenance. Because we are a community, right? We should all be proud to say we live in Downers Grove, and it shouldn't be, I'm a sucker for buying a home in Downers Grove that doesn't have any infrastructure to maintain the stormwater. So when you're making these decisions, I urge you to please make decisions that appropriately fund the projects we need going forward. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Nash. Good evening, welcome.
Thank you. Council members, fellow residents, my name is Brandon Thiel. I live at 4237 Elm. I'm Tim's neighbor. I have a brief statement, hopefully brief enough, that I prepared for this. Yes, we currently have no infrastructure serving our block save for a 4-inch pipe actually personally installed by Tim that drains to an Earlston ditch. We're not being provided the recommended level of service. An inch of rain can create significant flooding in 6 of our yards. We've experienced multiple property damage events resulting in tens of thousands of dollars of damage. While we've incurred significant personal expense to implement improved drainage systems in our yards to protect our homes, we're ultimately just pushing water at our neighbors, creating tension and conflict. Frustratingly, existing infrastructure draining into Wallingford, the Wallingford Park LPDA from the Washington Avenue project was, there was existing infrastructure torn out and replaced by a supersized system that was a couple blocks away from us while our problems persisted. We pay for maintenance and upgrades on a system we are not served by. I try to be environmentally conscious. My family uses, amongst other things, a solar system, 3 rain barrels, and we have a rain garden planted with native plants, but these measures can only do so much. We are on the improvement plan that's scheduled for 2 to 8 years out, so if the increases or the maintenance funds do not materialize like they need to, I think we're out of luck. I'd like to ask the council and our fellow residents to please support the continued funding of the identified stormwater improvement projects so that we and our other unserved or underserved neighbors might enjoy an improved level of stormwater service, if not the recommended level. I feel a referendum in this instance would fail us. Why would those served by the system currently pay for our improvements? Why am I paying for the maintenance for a system that does not help us? We're all in the same boat. Having said that, I hope our families don't need boats to leave our houses in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, for making your voice heard. Yes?
I'm going to make a point on those last 2 points. I want to be clear that I personally support all of the capital improvements that have been recommended. I support doing that by issuing bonds, and I support paying for those improvements with property taxes. But I do support those projects that are in the current pipeline from now until 4 or 5 years from now.
Yeah, I'm all for incenting rain barrels and rain gardens, and back in the city where I had the ability to redo some projects, I did permeable pavers, and I love the technology behind this stuff, and I think that incenting those projects, there's some value in that. Perhaps increasing incentives there could work to try to reduce some of the load on the system as it stands now. But again, when you have a rain event that's dumping even 2 inches on you, a 500-gallon cistern or a few hundred gallons of rain barrels doesn't do much. So,
well, after the April 2013 rain event, a lot of work was done for a number of recommended projects, and I support doing those projects. It's just a question of what revenue stream do we use to pay for it. I support finding a revenue stream to pay for it. Yeah. It's just a matter of which one do we use for it. And that's part of what I'm seeing with this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure. And my concern that I've expressed over and over again is that regardless of how you pay for it, whether it's from bonds or property tax or sales tax or stormwater utility, pick your poison. Nobody wants to pay it, so pick your poison. We have not funded up to the level that the plan is recommended, ever. Because there's been reluctance of this council and prior councils to fund up to the recommended level because of a perception that it's going to be an increase every year. It's not an increase every year. We have a plan. There's dollars tied to that plan.
But it is an increase every year.
It's an increase every year only because it's phased in. If the dollar amounts were all adopted at once, there'd be no increase. It would just be a flat dollar amount. But it's never been funded fully as recommended.
I'm happy paying for other people to have a storm infrastructure, even if it's failing or they need to rake out the grate. That's fine. I would like to also enjoy that. I'd be out there with my rake and my galoshes, making sure that thing is clear too.
I think my proposal is to 100% fund operations and maintenance and issue the bonds needed to do the recommended capital projects, which means funding everything staff's currently recommending.
Well, I agree with you on that point 100%.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we need to catch up for the past failure to fully fund too. Welcome. Good evening.
Hello, I'm Debbie Janicek, 5826 Brookbank Road. I have a question, I guess. For all the money that's been allocated for the stormwater projects, what percentage of the projects have been completed?
Percentage-wise, I don't know if I know that off the top of my head, but I think as we've identified, there might be a percentage in here somewhere, but I know that from 2008 to 2015, the village constructed more than 50 capital projects that were funded by principally a $25 million bond issuance. Do we have a percentage based on the overall list of projects, which again,
So I think you talked about capital money, and then you talked about the stormwater money.
well, the current system is there is a stormwater utility. And the reason it's called utility because it's a utility fund, which means that it raises money that goes in that fund only for stormwater purposes. So in other words, money that comes in from the stormwater fee isn't used to pay for the fire department or for snow plowing or for anything else. It's a dedicated revenue source that comes in and it gets spent on stormwater. There's two main components. There's actually a third, but there's two main components to the stormwater utility. One is operations and maintenance. So for example, if somebody builds a stormwater culvert, it has to be maintained because everything has to be maintained. And that's when we talk about O&M or operations and maintenance, it's the maintenance and operation of an existing facility that has been constructed, whatever it is. Capital, we're talking about new things primarily, or replacing existing structures with a new facility or a better facility. So you can think of it as shovels in the ground. So that's what we're talking about. When we talk about operations and maintenance, we're primarily talking about maintaining existing stormwater facilities. Capital is primarily, I'm paraphrasing, it's primarily about building new stuff or replacing stuff. So for example, if we're going to put curbs and gutter into a neighborhood that doesn't currently have it, that wouldn't be operation and maintenance, that would be capital, that would be a new project. Now once it's there, then it has to be maintained. So that then relates to the operation and maintenance. There is an administrative piece to that as well because somebody has to actually run all this, but those are primarily the two parts. And then the question that you asked was, of the identified capital projects, how many have been developed? And I've stalled long enough that we may have an answer. But mind you, it changed in 2013 because the April 23rd rain event that we had actually added projects to the list because that rain, new projects were identified. So I know the list changed, but I'll let staff answer the best they can in terms of a percentage.
Almost 100% of the high-priority capital projects identified in 2007 were completed prior to 2013. At that point, when we got almost all the way down the list of high-priority projects, we reprioritized and identified new projects and reconfirmed some of the existing projects. That is the difference between, that's when we went from the WIP 2007 prepared plan to the stormwater project analysis based on the 2013 flood. As far as the percentage of all the projects that have been identified back to 2007, that was literally hundreds of millions of dollars of projects, and it's a very small percentage of those.
Right, because what we did is we identified the projects and then they were prioritized for various reasons.
Right.
One, the ones that were most impactful, the ones that would do the most benefit to the most people. And so there was high, medium, and low, and it's more like a pyramid, as you can imagine. The further you go down the list, the more projects there are, if that helps.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Good question. I'm sure other people had the same one. Good evening, welcome.
How are you?
Excellent. How are you tonight?
Very good. My name's John Scoggin, 6661 Dunham Road. Resident, very proud resident of Downers Grove. Happy to call this home. Business owner in Downers Grove as well. But tonight, here's a resident. The first thing I want to do is thank you all very much for your hard work, for what I know can be a very thankless job. This discussion has been enlightening to me. I came here for really, sort of selfish reasons, and this has definitely changed my tune. I'm happy to see good discussion of possibilities, and that things are still on the table versus having something just shoved down your throat as a resident, which never sits very well. I'll talk briefly about my property, very briefly. You've heard it before. My wife's been here twice. She sent me tonight. I'm on video. I had to talk because I'm on video, so hi, Molly. We border Prentice Creek. not unlike a lot of stories we've heard, so it seems like there's a big issue with either standing water or flooding or what happens. So between 67th Street and Dunham Road is standing water. West of Dunham, along Bolson, is dry as a bone. So that being said, water's not moving through Prentice Creek. Reading the report that stretches, I've heard two different, I thought I read 2029. I've heard 2024 tonight. There's nothing south of 61st Street from now until 2029. I think that the issue that the utility fee gives you is the feeling I have as a resident is I'm paying a fee, you know, I want this taken care of, you know. I would feel the same if it, you know, in property taxes. I think the other bitter pill is when this fee came up in 2013, we attended those meetings, we were told, well, you're going to see a $300 decrease in your taxes in exchange for this utility fee. Well, I've seen my taxes go up about $500, and now we're talking about a stormwater fee that's going to go up, it's going to triple from now until 2029.
If I can just interrupt you there very quickly, it's just a point of information. That swap did happen that year because what had been on property taxes moved over to the fee. Going forward, things get more complicated because, number one, your property tax bill, the Village of Downers Grove only represents 9% of that. So the rest of it, the other 91% is driven by other taxing bodies. So if obviously it went up.
Sure.
The village portion actually has been relatively flat this current year, as an exception to that for reasons I won't go into because of public safety pension obligations. But yes, of course it went up because most of it.
I don't doubt. I'm not going to say that swap didn't happen. I believe that it did happen, but it was not reflected in my bill. And at the end of the day, perception's reality. You know.
Not going to disagree with you.
You know, and that's the thing. And the other thing, as far as the fee goes with the stormwater utility, you know, we're talking about going from whatever it is now, 2.9 million to 6 million. And it's, you know, if we're that far short, something happened in the setting when the utility fee was set up. In that, you know, why are we so short on that money? And the other thing is it's much easier to drop prices than it is to raise prices. The bitter pill, I think, for a lot of residents is to see their property taxes going up as well as now a stormwater fee and feel like they're getting nothing in return. That being said, I guess that's it. I appreciate your time, and we'll continue to follow the channels we need to follow. I don't think this is really the forum for our personal Prentice Creek, but it is concerning over the next 15 years to not have something earmarked. And that's the other thing the fee does. You know, people want equity because they're paying that fee. So,
right, no, understood, Mr. Scoggin.
Thank you very much.
Fee, they do expect results from that. And I just want to reiterate, when the fee was first set up, it could have been set at any different levels, but the decision at the time was to phase it in. So rather than say we need, I'll make up a number, we need $50 million and just take 50 million, divide it by everyone and collect it, it was phased in so that 50 million would be collected over time through what was designed to be a series of incremental increases to get to the 50 million. In other words, it was sort of backed into that way. You're absolutely right. In hindsight, perception is reality, and everybody looked at it as it's being increased every year, because yes, it was being increased every year, or to get to the dollar amount that was laid out in the report. In hindsight, maybe we should have just started off at a higher number, we would be further along.
Well, no one would have gone for it. And that's the thing is now, just like Mr. Olson said, it is being increased.
Same thing with property taxes, though. If your property taxes went up every year in order to get to that number, or it was all collected at once, people would not go for it just as well.
Right, and and that's the other point I wanted to make. I don't think that anyone in here, you know, again, as a proud member of this community, as a business owner of this community, I don't have a problem with capital improvements. I think the issue, you know, is fiscal responsibility, and that's actually the other point I wanted to make is the question rather is, does the village employ cost consultants? You know, as far as the cost of these projects. You know, we're talking about at $6 million a year, $500,000 a month being spent, which is a huge chunk of money. In the private sector, you know, there's cost consultants that will say, you know, you're out of line, you need to trim this much out of it. Even after the contract's been signed, if there's an overage, does the village employ cost consultants?
In a manner of speaking, yes, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. Number one, staff in the areas that they are experts in has a good idea of exactly what the market is for various things and where they can push a bidder to change their bid in order to be more acceptable to what we have in mind. In those areas where it might go beyond, the project might go beyond the expertise of the village, we have from time to time engaged outside consultants to assist us with that to make sure that we're getting a good deal. But third, of course, not being the private sector, we do most everything through competitive bidding. So that helps a lot in terms of those cost consultants, because if somebody comes in at a too high bid, guess what? They're not getting a contract. So it's, a lot of these things go to the lowest responsible bidder, and through the competitive bidding process, we get a lot of the benefits of what you described. So is there somebody that has that title? I don't think so, but I think the outcome of what you're looking at, by and large, is achievable. And then, of course, there's the 7 knuckleheads up here that look over everything before it actually gets approved. Other questions or comments? Thank you for yours.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, welcome.
Don Kaiser, 1215 Jefferson. You were not available last week. I talked about the swamp also. By not maintaining that and restricting the flow of silt into that area, you're impeding the flow of St. Joseph Creek to come in and out. I do believe it's in a floodplain, or it's part of that floodplain of which my house is a part of. And I think you can't add anything to a floodplain. So by not maintaining it, you're kind of defeating the purpose of the guidelines that are set up for a floodplain, where you cannot add to it. I cannot add dirt to my house, but you're adding silt and vegetation that are actually raising the level of that. So that's why I'm strongly suggesting that you address maintaining it, cleaning it out, and taking some of that debris out. Also, try sycamore. They're good for wet areas.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate that. I'll pass that along to my resident arborist, who's not me.
Fall cypress will do fine too.
Thank you, appreciate you being here. Thank you for coming back. Good evening, welcome.
Hello, my name is Ryan Delves. I'm on 5713 Middow, and I am brand new to Downers Grove. There's all these people that have been here for forever. I haven't even been here 6 months. I'm a new resident, and this is my first time ever coming to one of these meetings, and I should have prepared better. I had no idea this was going to be, I thought it was going to be like an hour long, but I had no idea. I'm ready for the next one.
Not when I'm running the meeting.
But I just wanted to say, I am a professionally licensed civil engineer for the state of Illinois and a certified floodplain manager. And when I moved here, I thought it was very progressive that Downers Grove had a stormwater utility fee. A lot of other communities, as you said, it's buried in the property tax. I think it is important that residents know that there's a dedicated funding source to capital improvement projects and the maintenance. One of the other things I think that needs to be stressed is the education thing. There's a lot of people that just don't understand what's going on here. Like a 100-year storm doesn't mean it happens once every 100 years. Like a lot of people don't know that. So there's a lot of education that would probably benefit a lot of people just on how stormwater works and some of the terms as that goes. And then I also just wanted to say that this is a problem that's not going to be going away, so it doesn't matter how, this needs to be addressed in some fashion. It doesn't matter if it's the stormwater utility fee or the property tax, but this is a problem that needs to be addressed. No one wants to pay a tax, no one wants to pay a fee, but this needs to be addressed. This is not something that's just going to disappear if we don't fund it. So I would ask you guys to definitely look into fully funding the stormwater utility fee and addressing the problems that are ongoing in Downers.
Thank you for being here. Thanks for sharing your comments, and welcome to Downers Grove.
Thank you.
Good evening, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Dan Schoenberg from 5236 Carpenter Street. I'll try not to repeat other comments that have been made today. I do support the utility, not only for O&M, but for capital improvement projects, because stormwater facilities are not glamorous. They just do not compete well with new roads and new pieces of equipment. As a result, they never get the public funds necessary to do what needs to be done. Local history has proven this for Downers Grove and for other towns. Really, the money isn't spent on capital improvement projects until after the flood happens. The successful referenda that happens after the flood is reactive. It happens after people have been hurt. The advantage of the utility is that it is proactive. It establishes the revenue stream so that you can engage in some long-term thinking and implementation. Nobody likes paying for government services, but I would prefer my local government taking the active step to address identified needs for the community with the use of this utility. I also believe that the use of impervious area for the utility is a good idea. It makes each property owner responsible for their own construction choices, whether they are tax exempt or not, and it rewards good behavior. If a person chooses to make his property have less impervious, he gets less fee. Whereas if you stay on a corporate tax, property tax basis, such improvements and such investment ends up in more property tax, which is counterproductive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schoenberg. Appreciate your comments. Thank you for being here. Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Tim Meany. I live at 420 Franklin Street. And just by way of a couple of preliminary comments, number one, I really appreciate the format tonight that you used in terms of your speaking first and allowing us to hear your thoughts on all of these various things and where you are on it so that we can respond knowledgeably and intelligently. The other thing is that I haven't been to one of these forums in quite some time, and I must say that I appreciate the extent and the depth of the discussion and reason to dissent, among others, that I'm hearing. I don't recall that in previous council meetings that I've been here in past years, and I congratulate you on seeing that sort of thing here and hearing it. The discussion tonight sort of paralleled what I saw in the stormwater document that was mentioned in the video earlier this evening. And that is, as I think you may recall from a memo or an email I sent you a few weeks ago, that document seems to make an assumption and just leap forward to some things. The document, in my mind, says, we got a problem. B, how much is it going to cost to fix it? C, where's the money going to come from? Rather than focusing and starting to examine potential causes that may be contributing to this issue. The only person who I heard tonight speaking to causes was Mr. Waldeck, and in his narrative about the individual, the elderly woman who called him frequently to talk about something happening in her neighborhood with water that didn't happen in the past before certain things took place in town. In her neighborhood, that is, in terms of building and so on and so forth. And with that in mind, and with thinking about, can we refocus this discussion or include in this discussion going forward that you're going to be having over the next several weeks and months, can we also include some reflection on the causes and what they are and how they have contributed to the situation we're facing right now, with the idea in mind, of course, of being, can we alleviate those causes, and in turn, will that bring some types of cost efficiencies into place? Will we really need $4 million to maintain the system over time? Will we really need $42 million in capital funding necessarily? Can that, if we address causes, can we reflect on that amount of money that we need and perhaps scale it back if we address the causes intelligently? You suggested, Mr. Mayor, that perhaps we could provide some suggestions as to, how these things might be accomplished that we're coming up here and complaining about. And I have several to offer to you. One is, admittedly, on the one hand, we benefit as a community from the larger tax base that we get from larger and more expensive homes that we're building in this community. Are we simply exacerbating the stormwater problem in allowing those homes to be built to the extent that they are right now? And secondly, and related to that, would it make sense to determine whether or not the currently allowable permeable to impermeable surface on various properties, if that ratio is sufficient to absorb the amount of runoff that we have from those properties now? Do we need to rethink the zoning footprint, in other words, in a number of areas? Thirdly, is it possible to look closely at the depth of basements, that are being dug for a number of these new homes? Are they, in effect, in some cases, going below the water table? And is that contributing to the amount of sump output that they're producing and producing more runoff water in the village? And maybe we ought to think, too, and acknowledge that perhaps the effect of the wholesale removal of trees from properties when they're being prepared for new housing, the basically clear cutting of these properties, perhaps is having an impact on the capacity of these lots to absorb water. And perhaps we should think about some policy that would maintain trees on properties that would help, in effect, with this water absorption and alleviate the problem at the root, no pun intended, but as a way of addressing the causes rather than how do we pay for the problem we've got. We might also consider creating additional measures that place stormwater control expenses where they belong. And by that I mean perhaps on the builder, by requiring such things as permeable driveways, permeable patios, and things of that nature. We might even want to address consider the option of perhaps builders contributing dollars to solutions for the neighbors who are going to have drainage issues caused as a result of the builder's new construction. I know we have a fund right now in the village that offers a certain amount of funds to help people do that, but that's probably insufficient to the issues that we're seeing, especially the ones that I'm hearing tonight. And possibly, too, as a sixth item, maybe establishing a baseline for the village of the permeable area that exists today in Downers Grove. I'm thinking, for example, of the aerial survey that was done a few years ago to establish the stormwater utility. That could serve as a baseline, perhaps. We would be able to tell, going forward, how much permeable area we're losing, and maybe what we ought to do about it, rather than just spend more money on where does the water go. And I know, Mr. Mayor, you mentioned last week at your meeting, I happened to see a bit of it on YouTube, that there is a National Flood Insurance Program risk mapping effort going, or funding going forward, $311 million.
Federal EPA, yes.
Federal money being allocated to that, and perhaps
FEMA, excuse me, not EPA, FEMA.
Yes, FEMA. Perhaps some of that money, if it's allocated to us, could be used for just that sort of mapping and understanding where our permeable land is disappearing to, or at least the rate at which it's disappearing, and what we need to do perhaps to control that rate of disappearance. Those are my thoughts. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Meany, and I appreciate the thoughtful suggestions. Just to reiterate, with respect to some of the residential redevelopment issues, I would hazard to say that over the last decade, there's been more attention to that, particularly the stormwater element and others, than before. And again, examples would be the reduction in allowances of lot splits, floor area ratios, which is what you're talking about with respect to the amount of improvement space versus the footprint of the property, setbacks, discharge issues. I think there's been more attention to trying to minimize the source of the problem than there has been in the prior decade. That being said, there's also a balance to all of this. In the past, when we've had residential redevelopment conversations about changing our zoning ordinance with respect to those kind of issues, we've invited in various voices, and it is about achieving a balance because, again, you want to make sure that people can use their property to the way that they expect to, and yet also be mindful of the needs and the demands upon the community. In some instances, the new construction is actually an improvement over what was there before, because people actually do things such as regrading and installation of retention and detention that didn't exist beforehand. So not all new construction is bad. Sometimes it's a great improvement over what's there. I'll give the example where I have people next door to me that are built right on the lot line, discharging right on my property. That would not be allowed today. We have a very eclectic housing stock in Downers Grove, things that go back to what Ogden Avenue used to be called Old Plank Road for a reason, because there's been some things here that have been around for a long time. That's something we take a great deal of pride in. And we do want to achieve that balance. I mean, for example, I wouldn't want to make it so cost prohibitive for the Gassens to put an addition on a historic home because of too many regulations, and yet I'm using that as an extreme example. I think that we do try to achieve that balance, but your suggestions are well taken, and I do think that the community as a whole, including its represented elected officials, are more mindful of those issues today than, say, 10, 15 years ago. But thank you again for being here. Other questions or comments?
Well,
Welcome back.
I don't want to be a pig, but those were great suggestions.
Yes, I appreciate that.
I mean, you can summarize that in terms of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Or maybe a gallon of cure in this case.
Well, whatever metric system or British system you want to use, but that's the whole thing in a nutshell, really. The other thing I want to mention real quick is, I don't know if the staff is aware, but apparently Packy Webb wants to probably do a big project on Ogden Avenue. You guys know about this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, now everybody knows. Apparently, they're going to have a meeting, at least one, maybe, I don't know what their strategy is, soften the neighbors up first.
It's a required neighborhood meeting. It's under our new zoning ordinance. It's tomorrow night at 7 o'clock at the Rec Center, Park District Rec Center on Belmont Road. It's targeted for the neighbors for one-on-one interaction, but everybody's welcome.
This is actually something we're requiring.
Yes, this is a requirement to address the concern that people were coming to the Plan Commission meetings not being aware of what's being proposed, and this gives them more time to prepare questions, comments, concerns for the Plan Commission meeting. I think that Plan Commission meeting is scheduled for the first week of April. I'll probably see you there tomorrow night, Mr. Connors. Thanks.
Yeah, so this project is, I think it's probably, unless I'm wrong, it's like a 10-acre site, which is a really big site these days. So the potential for screw up there is gigantic. Screw up with respect to stormwater management.
Potential for
really,
success
really
is
nervous
also
about
gigantic.
this. What?
I said the potential for success is also gigantic.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other questions or comments from the audience? Good evening and batting cleanup.
Good evening. John Plivka, 6016 Washington. I guess I'm the anomaly. I don't get water.
But some of the people here would love to send it your way.
Twice in 40 years, both times extended power outages. But that doesn't mean I'm not concerned about the problem. Like the schools, you pay for them whether you have children in the schools or not. So I'm gonna pay for this. My choice right now, from what I've heard, would be both the utility and taxes, somewhat like Commissioner White proposed, maintenance and capital projects. I also feel that Village Council should look at residential redevelopment. You have very stringent requirements on commercial redevelopment, where the developer is here to make a profit. He leaves, there's water problems that we have to pay for. Secondly, I think the residents would be a little bit more comfortable with paying what they don't want to pay if there was a priority and a reason why the priority for projects was given. That project that, we'll just use Glendenning and 40th, will benefit 200 homes or 50 homes or 20 homes. Because it's just, I have trouble dealing with the water quality improvements where we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars so we have cleaner water to go downstream and flood somebody's home that we should be repairing. And I know this is a mandate by the federal government, but I don't think they require a specific dollar amount or square footage amount per year.
No, actually, that's a very complicated question, which, over that same beer and pizza, I'll be happy to talk to you about in terms of what's required and measuring the quality of the water at the output and how you get there. It's
right. That should be the least of our worries when we have people with flooding.
I agree with you, and we just have to navigate, again, no pun intended, we have to navigate those waters of the federal government because there can be serious sanctions if you don't meet with their expectations.
We're not going to have a funding fairy come along and give us a bundle of money, so.
No, but could do the opposite.
We're going to have to pay for it. So let's do the best we can. You have to be proactive with the redevelopment, and staff has to come up and say, hey, education-wise, this is why we need the money, and this is how we're going to help the most people in this village.
Thank you, Mr. Polifka. I think you made a good point about the education, which is, we obviously have discussions like this where for a point in time, everyone is the knowledge level or the awareness level is very high because we're focused on it, and over time it tends to go up and down again. That happens with the community. Obviously, people have busy lives, they're focused on other things. That happens as we have changes in the council. So I think you make a good point about education and reminding people what we're doing, why we're doing it, and that includes the prioritization.
I'll leave the book closed this time.
Welcome back.
I'll try not to bristle. One of the on-scene effects of the stormwater runoff fee is it absolves the homeowner of the responsibility of taking care of his stormwater runoff. And it brings it down to these gentlemen who are going to be there with the 5-gallon bucket trying to bail out their properties. If there could be some happy medium between the stormwater projects and incentive or, well, not just a one-time credit toward the homeowner for actions that they've taken to retain that stormwater runoff on their property, that would probably work out a lot better, and that would put the responsibility back on the homeowner to take care of that stormwater runoff. There has to be some kind of happy medium where that can be reached.
Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. Bless you. Thank you to everyone. I'm going to come back to the council now. I appreciate everyone, first of all, your patience in coming back for this discussion. Number two, appreciate everyone, their patience in being here and sharing their thoughts. As predicted, there were a myriad of opinions and viewpoints on what is a multifaceted, complicated issue. So I think it's a surprise that you've also heard a myriad of viewpoints and thoughts up here. We're not making any decisions tonight, but I will ask my intrepid colleagues if they have any other comments or questions at this juncture, understanding this conversation is, I don't even want to say close to being over with, but based on what we heard tonight, if anyone wants to add anything, we could say, I won't say anything if you don't, if that gives you any incentive.
I won't say a word.
Throwing caution to the wind, Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you. Hey, you get to go first this time. First off, I want to correct something that I said earlier. I was listening to the math. The $4 million on maintenance that would be spent, coming out to $180 per residence, no matter which way you collect it, would be annual. It wouldn't be spread out over time. So, $180 every residence annually. And I think our average house, the Downers Grove portion of the property taxes for an average house is somewhere around $650, if I recall. $600, $650, something like that. So we're talking about $180 out of that $650, or unless you raise it. Comments on the building and construction. Maybe we ought to look at fees on new construction. They contribute to, there's a school fee, there's sidewalks, we have various ways to collect. Maybe we should revisit some of that, see if that can be raised or at least be more equitable. And lastly, the way we sold the stormwater fee was that it isn't just the residents who pay the property taxes that are getting the fee, it's a wider group all chipping into the same pot. And then as it was passed, we lowered the universe that has to pay. And rightly, I think in some cases, and wrongly in others. Could we have, I don't even, as long as Commissioner White thinks some of this might be illegal, maybe we can take it a step further and be even possibly more illegal. Have a fee that you put on everybody, but then you give, you give the money back to not give it back, but not charge, you exempt the nonprofits, you exempt maybe the residents. And, as long as you're paying a property tax, you don't get the fee. And if you're not paying, if you're in a group that isn't paying a property tax, you get a fee. I mean, it was legal to pull some groups out. Maybe what we can do is pull the residents out, since they're paying the property taxes, and be able to expand that universe. I don't know if that, if that point is getting across, but for example, the tollway was exempted. Suppose we make it universal, make the tollway pay, but pull out the residents. Kind of a reverse situation. Anyway, just some quick thoughts, and I thank you for the time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Barnett.
Another piece of information that might be nice. It might be helpful going forward if we had, and I think this would probably be easy, I don't think it's a 4-hour thing, but a little one-page write-up on the changes that we've made over the last, I think there's 2 changes over about 4 years that as it relates to residential construction and the demands that we place on them relative to stormwater management. There are certainly 20 years of construction that have been a challenge, but clearly the changes we've made, we're not going to really see effects for a year or 2. And yet that kind of is hanging out there as, I hate paying for stormwater when I know people are still wrecking it kind of thing. And I think there's been a lot of work done to sort of sort that out, and it might be good if we just gave everybody a little refresher. There's something that was easy to post on our website so people could get a handle on what's going on there.
Will do.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. All right, well, the conversation will continue.
Very briefly.
I almost got away with it. Commissioner White.
Okay. One thing I took away from this evening is a number of residents spoke about the importance of doing maintenance on their creeks, Prentice Creek, St. Joe Creek, elsewhere. And that's why I think it's extremely important that we fully fund the recommended operations and maintenance, because that's, in some ways, that's a very easy way to minimize flooding. If creeks are silting up, that's a problem. Next, as far as this discussion going forward, by my tally, there's 5 of us that really not necessarily happy about it, at least 5, but are willing to pay for operations and maintenance with the stormwater utility fee. Maybe reluctantly, but at least 5 of us at least are willing to pay O&M, pay the O&M
I
portion.
had 3 who said that. 2, I'm not quite sure they had a position on it, and 2 that disagreed.
Yeah, and then, but
my tally's a little different.
Okay, well, that's what, but on the capital projects, I think there's a very clear difference of opinion. I have strongly held opinions, and yet I recognize that a democratic society, I need to accept the will of the majority. My number 1 goal from this entire process is that when we go into 2017, whatever system we adopt, the community as a whole accepts it and understands it. Because that way, then they'll have political legitimacy. Because I think it's kind of a large ask to ask council members year after year to do an 8 or 9% increase when people in the public don't understand it and they're out there to hang you about why are you increasing this 8 or 9%? Well, because Mayor Tully said it's a good idea, that's why I voted the way I did. Well, that's not necessarily the way to sustain this over 20 years. And we do need to have a sustainable funding source. So I do want to point out that I'm not sure we're going to talk each other into a true consensus. And I think a 4-3, and as far as going forward, isn't necessarily good on the political legitimacy issue, because April 17, maybe the 4-3 will flip and we're having this all over again. So in that regard, one thing I do want to think about, I'm not sure I'm committed to this yet, but the possibility of a referendum in November about whether capital projects should be funded with the stormwater utility fee or with real estate taxes. And if there's a clear, if the public expresses its will, even contrary to my position, they've expressed their opinion. And that's my job, is to represent. I mean, I'm advocating my position, I think, forcefully, but I accept that I don't get to make all the decisions.
Commissioner Olson.
What Commissioner White just said about referendum is something I support. But I support going one step further and putting the whole thing, capital and operations and maintenance, up to referendum. The whole idea of a fee should be up for referendum, fee versus tax. Thanks.
I just want to clarify the issue of fee versus tax, not every capital expenditure above a certain amount, because otherwise we put the roads on there as well, sidewalks, and probably half of what we do. You were just talking about the decision between tax or fee.
On stormwater, I think.
On stormwater.
I was talking about the topic we've been talking about.
Well, I was picking up on your earlier comments. I want to make sure I'm clear.
Well, I really had not talked about the streets, though, just to say I think it's important that we maintain systems.
Right.
All the systems in the village.
But there's really no distinction between a $10 million street project and $10 million stormwater project. They're both capital projects. And I just want to make sure you're not suggesting that we have a referendum every time a capital project exceeds a certain amount.
What I'm suggesting, and maybe, perhaps that might be a good idea, and maybe it's something I should look into, is to suggest in the future. But what I was suggesting here is the difference is that there is much debate in the community about this fee issue. And so perhaps one way to resolve the issue in a democratic way, we have the highest turnout election of any election coming up in November. And we have the opportunity as a body to place up to three referendum questions on that ballot. We have a great opportunity to hear from the people directly. And this is an issue that's been, it's been discussed for quite some time. And I think to pose it in a way that this fee versus tax issue, in a way that recognizes the need to have some funding for stormwater projects without the need, without just saying, oh, well, do you support a fee? People would say, no, I don't want to pay a fee. But recognizing there's some trade-offs there, I think, that's really the benefit that could be gained, and really understanding the will of the people who, send us here to do it. But I think this is one of those areas where we could gain some additional insight from hearing from them directly. That's all I'm suggesting. And I'm not necessarily hearing that there's a majority support for that right at this moment, but I think it's something that I wanted to put out on the table.
Well, again, we're not deciding anything tonight. People are throwing out ideas. I've heard at least 17, maybe now 18 different opinions on what to do. I'm not quite sure that we had any kind of consensus, but I don't think we were supposed to get to consensus tonight. This was a conversation. We were supposed to talk amongst ourselves and also with the public, those who weighed in here tonight, those who will continue to weigh in through emails and the other sources of communication that we have. My prediction is that we will maybe not come to a consensus, but we might come to a plurality.